Hey folks, welcome back. Time for a look at another supplement for the fantastic Dune Adventures in the Imperium role-playing game by Modifius. This one is called Power and Pawns, the Emperor's Court, and unlike supplements for some other systems you might find, this one is not what I would consider standalone in the sense that some of the contents in here really don't make a lot of sense unless you already own the great game, The Houses of the Landsraad. So I would definitely recommend buying that supplement first before you look into Power and Pawns. They both go together really, really well, and each adds like a layer of additional play styles on top of the original core rulebook. So by the time you get to Power and Pawns, you're dealing with actually being in the Emperor's Court, leading a great house, being guild envoys or directors of Chom, stuff like that. Really high-level plots are taking place, and it's another layer above the kind of extra house management detail that was added in the great game. So they all kind of go together in sequence in a way. I'll say this is a really, really nice book. It comes in 144 pages, which is a bit longer than 128 of the great game, and part of that is because there's an actual adventure included, which I think is really helpful because they're kind of illustrating this style of play. Really high-level characters with a lot of influence, the kind of intrigues that can happen at that level. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go into the details of that adventure. We'll just quickly flick through it. But it's really nice that they put that example in here because I think a high-level intrigue campaign that possibly could cover the known universe and beyond in Dune is quite a high ask. Giving an adventure to illustrate how to do that to the players and GMs out there is a great thing. Before we dive in, let's take a quick look at the blurb on the back cover here. There's no greater power than the Emperor, but the more power and wealth he has, the more his ambition grows. To make an ally of House Carino, the House of the Emperor, is to ally with the force that controls the known universe. Those in the Emperor's grace can wield unspeakable power as long as they can never forget where it comes from. So I'm going to go through a little bit more about what's in here. An in-depth look at the Emperor's Court and the imperial homeland of Kaitain. Kaitain? I always say Kaitain. Life at court and the entertainment and distractions available on the most beautiful planet in the known universe. A look at the brutal Sardaukar, the deadliest fighters in the Imperium. And you can even use them as PCs with a host of new abilities. The secrets of the Theolaxu, including the option to use face dancers as player characters and new options for mentats. Very, very cool. An array of new talents and skills for the Ginaz Sword School and the Suka Medical School, including 6 new drive options for any character. Again, very, very cool. Mysterious Planet of Ix and the advanced technology of House Vernius revealed. A host of detail for the GM on running complex political campaigns and intrigues. Notes for players with ambition, detailing how they can take control of their house or take a role within it and destroy the reputation of those in their way, be they ally or enemy. Ooh. And finally, a complete adventure, Blood and Riches, where the player characters must negotiate a tense conflict between two great houses that might plunge the Imperium into war. So the fate of your house is in your hands, its rise only limited by your ambition and perhaps your ruthlessness. So it sets a really good tone right from the beginning here. Reading the back of that book should get you excited. Once again, just the black void of space, though, for the end papers. Nothing of note here. We do have, again, the beautiful cover art rendered without the titles and trademarks and all that sort of jazz. And we have the opposing flags of Atreides and Harkonnen. Nice reference to the original storyline of Dune and the subsequently excellent movies. And then we get into the book proper. Once again, we have a really detailed table of contents, which again is in really small font. So there you go. There's a lot in this volume. Once again, it looks deceptively thin, but the amount of gameable content is huge. So we have an introduction here, so we'll skip largely over that. I do really like, again, how they do these overview pages here. They give you a summary of each chapter with a nice little illustration here. It's very visual, it's very absorbing, and gives you that sort of top-level view of the book that you need when you first approach it. And you've got this intimidating mass of rules in front of you. You know where to look to get what you need. Each chapter opens with a lovely 2-pager and a excellent quote from the novels. So we'll talk about the Imperial Throne. So first, the Imperial Court. So the head of House Carino has occupied the Golden Lion Throne for more than 10,000 standard years. And so the Emperor is the most powerful person in the known universe. His power is theoretically balanced by that of the Landsraad, but a lot of things the Landsraad wants to do needs to be signed off by the Emperor, so it's not always as much of a balancing factor as it may appear. Secondly, you have the other powers like Chom, the Spacing Guild, and the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood, who all have a huge amount of power, including over the Emperor himself, because they offer something unique and they hold a monopoly over that thing. So the Emperor needs it just as much as anybody else, and so while standing outside of the standard kind of house system, they do wield a tremendous amount of power. The High Council of the Landsraad is kind of the one exception to the imperial domination of everything. The Emperor has no seat there, and the great houses have seats there, so there's a lot they can achieve, but again, few of their decisions can come to fruition without the Emperor's signature, so the relationship between the High Council of the Landsraad and the Emperor himself can be quite interesting. So then we get into life at the Imperial Court. The Imperial capital, it looks absolutely beautiful on first appearances, but of course, the back alleys in the noble houses and the social functions are filled with death, deceit, and espionage all over the place, so you gotta watch your back back everywhere you go. Outside, the planet radiates beautiful cleanliness, wonderful greenery, striking architecture. Everything is luxurious. All the most extravagant needs you could have from across the known universe are available here. Let's talk about the experiences of life at court for the noble sphere. So Kaitain is an exercise in contradictions for them. On one hand, you have bouquets of exotic, fragrant blossoms over every dining table, but there are poisonous snoopers hanging ominously overhead at every dinner as well. So even while you're enjoying these expensive liqueurs and beautiful foods from across the known universe, you have to worry for your very life and what might be getting plotted behind your back and what your enemies and allies might be up to at any given point. There's also this, what they call the sartorial feud. So there's an interesting sort of competition between being the most fashionable amongst the houses on Kaitain. So tastes change quite rapidly, and two particular houses, minor houses of the House Carino, so House Rucain and House Vermilion, try and focus their efforts on leading the trends of Kaitain couture. So House Vermilion is all about biological and technical solutions being integrated into their design. House Rucain, they hunt down the rarest materials for the finest new looks. There's an example of musical bells made from shells found deep in the waters of Caladan's oceans. There's also the social clubs, so for the houses major, some for the most privileged great houses, some for minor houses, and then there's the Kazoku Society, which is restricted only to members of House Carino. And in these clubs, you'll find gambling halls, dining halls, tasting rooms for different kinds of foods, and many sort of deals and alliances will be hashed out in these sort of places. Then there's some discussion of the different positions and ranks in the Emperor's court. House Lehman, a minor house under Carino's sway, they provide scribes and visual artists, so they do the most beautiful calligraphy in the universe. And for that, they are key allies as a minor house of House Carino. Many houses want to have one of their members at court, so they try to send their most talented artists, all these kind of things, dancers, theater players, musicians, and they present their work to the Emperor. And if they're pleasing enough to the Emperor, then they might be invited to court to make a portrait of the Emperor, for example, if you're an artist. But usually they expect you to leave after that, so you're not hanging around. The Emperor is smart enough to not surround himself with countless hangers-on who could provide a listening ear and a conduit of information back to their house. Now, some emperors have chosen an advisor from outside their own house, but they're usually related by blood. If you're not within that very small circle, there's only going to be a limited amount of trust that you could possibly ever achieve with House Carino and the Emperor if you don't have a blood relationship. And then there are a number of courtiers and members of the Emperor's entourage that have got really minor tasks, but they've stuck to those tasks for generations, and so they've turned into real jobs. So you've got examples here of the Master of the Goblet. This person's sole job is to give the Emperor his first drink at dinner. That's it. The Master of the Robes gets the Emperor into his jacket in the morning. The Lord of the Toast, who announces who the company will drink to in the Emperor's name at formal dinners. So there's all these kind of interesting little positions, and I love this. It adds a little bit more flavor to life at court. It gives plenty for the GM to, establish and describe the environment of preposterous luxury that's enjoyed by Emperor Shaddam IV. There's a guide here to navigating courtly life. If you want to try and get the Emperor's support behind something, it's difficult to get his ear, so the easiest way, they say, is via the High Council of the Landsround. So if you're yourself the head of one of the great houses, or if you have their support, there's a chance the High Council will support your project idea if you have something that you want to do. Or if you don't have the support, then you must be a petitioner and basically present the proposal to a series of increasingly senior clerks, administrators, and advisors, any of whom could take offense or decide to block the project arbitrarily on its way to the Emperor's desk. They often have to go round and round in circles, and one bureaucrat refers them to another, which goes back to the previous one, which goes back to the other one, all that kind of stuff, and it can take some time. But eventually, the High Council can take up your cause, and in the meantime, you need not waste your waiting time. You can use that to socialize, enjoy the food, the drink, the decor, and try and build alliances that might help your cause. You can try and settle old scores through poisons and hunter-seekers. If you are serving the aristocracy, you're still not immune to the plots and schemes that are happening around you. The best thing you try to do is avoid the dance of politics as much as possible. Dodging the political and social plays of the upper classes without getting involved is the best way to ensure your survival. Much of House Carino's minor houses focus on the sort of what they refer to as panem et circenses, the idea of bread and circuses. Basically, the ruling elite keep their people quiet and content by giving them lots of distraction. The minor houses on Kaitain are good for doing that, for example, with the sartorial feuds described earlier. So by keeping the nobles distracted, the ugliness of the universe is hidden from outsiders, and the houses cover up ugliness and poverty that hides itself on Kaitain itself as well. They'll take victims of poverty and distress and move them out of planet or out of sight, not solving the underlying problems, of course. So on the outskirts of the city of Corinth, which is the capital, the workers live tucked out of sight in the outskirts, and there's this place called Emporium Barith, which is where Corinth's working class people shop. Upon entering the massive building, there's a shift in the very air. The people going about their business here have a vanishingly small chance of running into a noble, and so they can let their guard down just a little. There are friendships being made there. There's a lively atmosphere and a lot less of the sort of stiff and self-controlled formality that you get in a noble gathering. And then we have a list of some celebrations and festivals that take place on Kaitain. So there's a lot of these, basically, displays of light and sound, and those looking to curry favor with the Padishah Emperor will often organize celebrations of the Golden Lion Throne. So they'll have feasts in honor of House Corino, they'll have gladiatorial games, festivals, whatever. And there's some examples here of the holy days and festivals that happen on Kaitain itself. So there's the Feast of Corin, so marking the anniversary of the Battle of Corin, where they achieved their power. We have the holy days of the Orange Catholic Faith. We've got the celebration of the New Year. This is a funny one because supposedly this is supposed to be a time of quiet reflection where you think about the more simple and important aspects of life and be humble. But this turns into a kind of stylish and farcical display amongst the nobles on Kaitain. So they're trying to pretend that they're being understated, but actually the fashions they're doing to do so are staggeringly expensive, made of the most finest materials. Not really sticking to the spirit of the festival. And then we got info about staying at court. So, of course, if you are able to stay at the court of the Golden Lion Throne, you'll have loads of lavish excess. Everything is opulent. Every need is catered for. Every physical want and desire is catered to. The Imperial Opal Palace is, of course, one of the most incredible structures in the galaxy. And then while you're there, there'll be plenty of things to enjoy, like theatrical events. And then, of course, there are the Emperor's Gardens. So they're all around the grounds of the Imperial Palace and all over Corinth City. So this is a place where a lot of deals are done. They could be building alliances, or they could be dastardly deeds to disrupt trade to entire systems or starve out another house and destroy their power. While you're walking through the gardens, enjoying the incredible views, you might unfortunately stumble upon something you weren't supposed to see, which could be good or bad, depending on how you play it. So keep that in mind. The most important part of the gardens is the Contemplation Tea House. Access is only granted by the invitation of the Emperor and is regarded as a great honor. Again, so much flavor added to this section. I really do enjoy it. So now we get into some of the nitty-gritty of getting the attention of the Emperor himself. So many members of the Landstrat, of course, are desperate to meet with him. They believe it will help them get power, get wealth, destroy their rivals, get a CHOAM directorship, all this kind of stuff. But the Emperor knows all that. And of course, if you offend him or go about it in the wrong way, he can go the other direction and use his influence to utterly destroy you, forcing you to go renegade or just destroying your house completely. So there's a risk involved, but for a house that's trying to ascend, the risk is normally worth it. So the official channels, of course, that we've seen are very slow and bureaucratic. You need specialized knowledge, but if you try to climb the social ladder, that could be an interesting way to do it as well. So that would be by going to the right parties, the right prestigious events, getting a chance meeting with the Emperor, doing something intriguing enough at these events you might get invited to see him, becoming a concubine or getting somebody married into his family. It's another way of increasing the odds of seeing him. So in relation to that, they talk about the social season on Kaitain. So the social season is when the palace becomes crowded with guests. Houses both major and minor have their own suites and residences on the planet. Ships are jostling for room in the skies above, and there's a constant hum of shuttles going from the massive hayliners down to the surface and back. All around the streets you can smell the expensive colognes and scents of all the aristocrats. And then we have another minor house, House Baudelaire, who is tasked with the administrative side of things, ensuring the planet has enough resources to accommodate all of these temporary visitors. Then, of course, we have the parties and events. This is often where the Emperor or other aristocrats will try to be the tastemakers. They'll set up unusual instruments from dark corners of the Imperium and bring them through, try and create a new sensation. They'll bring exotic types of dancing, private concerts, hunting parties, anything where they can make themselves socially visible. And they'll even make use of their mentats to calculate where they should appear for the greatest chance of getting positive influence or getting close to the Emperor. Having a mentat can help you calculate the likely success of some of these endeavors. Then we get into House Jongleur. So they're actually a famed and renowned minor house of the Imperium, known for the members' incredible skill as performers. They actually have a sort of variation of the special voice ability of the Bene Gesserit, but it's less sophisticated. It inspires emotions in the viewer of their performances, and that can be either a whole crowd or it can be just to an individual. So that can be extremely useful if a member of House Jongleur wants to influence a particular person in private, or if they're on stage to drive a certain emotional cascade through the audience. And basically, because being in House Jongleur requires an immense amount of training, they're considered a new faction, so they can't be a Fremen and a Jongleur or be a guild agent as well. They have to be just a House Jongleur. It does say here that it's possible a Bene Gesserit could secretly develop similar skills. GM might allow a Bene Gesserit to learn some Jongleur exclusive talent. And as long as a member of House Jongleur who has had their training doesn't betray their secrets, they don't consider that a betrayal if you go and work somewhere else. So they have a faction template here. Of course, they get the trait of Jongleur, suggested archetypes, courtier, empath, envoy, and steward. Their mandatory talent is project emotion. Anyone who can hear the Jongleur speak, an emotional trait of the Jongleur's choice for the remainder of the scene is given to them. So this trait must be the same for all the people affected by this talent, and the affected can only feel a moderate amount of this emotion and can shake it off with an average D1 discipline test if they think to do so. The Jongleur can apply this talent into normal speech so it's not obvious it's being used. They should also take a focus in one of the following: acting, acrobatics, dance, disguise, etiquette, empathy, grace, music, physical empathy, or self-control. They also have the possible talent of targeted emotion. So this is when you do projecting emotion but at a single person. Basically, you have to be engaged with them in conversation for several minutes, and then the target will gain an emotional trait of the Jongleur's choosing, but it should be a strong emotion like rage or love or something like that. Then you can try to use that trait, make a test, to persuade the target to do some. The trait's removed at the end of the scene, but if the target is aware they're being manipulated, which is not a given, then they could try to shake off the feeling and remove the trait with a daunting difficulty 3 discipline test for that. Let me get some details on House Corino. So this is laid out much the same as in the Great Game, but we have some additional information here. So we have House Corino, the motto, the center will hold. So the colors are gold and scarlet with the crest of the lion. So we can see here with this wonderful mane in the shape of a diamond. House traits, imperial and wealthy. Primary domains are farming and forestry through military workers. So the Sardaukar terror troops are the most feared fighters in the Imperium, and they have a number of secondary domains. These are the multiple minor houses that they control. Their other holdings besides Kaitain are Seleucus Secundus, which is now an Imperial prison planet, but it used to be the original home of Corino before it was devastated by atomics, and then it became a prison planet and the training center for the Sardaukar. They're the most able soldiers in the universe, and the Landsraad believes that it's impossible to beat them on the field of battle. Then we talk about their population and lifestyle, the noble family. So the current emperor at this time in the game's history is Padisha Emperor Shaddam Corino IV. So this is all taking place before events of Dune. I believe there will be other books coming out that will set the action in other eras, which are briefly referred to in the core rulebook. The new campaign that's come out turns basically Dune 2 the movie into a campaign following the fall of the Imperium, which is going to be great. So if they do more stuff like that for other eras, plus, era source books, I think that would be a fantastic way to go for the game and really cater to every possible fan of the series. There are lots of things to like that are interesting about different eras in the history of that monumental series. I think in total it covers about 6,000 years of history, so there's a lot going on. So then we have their prominent minor houses. Of course, we have Leman, they are the calligraphers. Verond, they supply basic produce and agriculture. Beaujolari is the political house, and then we have, of course, House Rucain, House Vermilion, the leaders of Imperial fashion, and of course House Jongleur. Then we have their agenda, which gets in some spoilers for the film, so I'll try to avoid that. Then we have the background of Kaitain itself. In the star system Alpha Waiping, it's got 4 moons. It's a habitable class 4 planet, of course dominated by House Corino. Their primary export is imperial government. Their population mostly lives in large cities and some smaller settlements, and they mention several locations of interest. Of course, we've seen the Contemplation Tea House, Corinth City itself, the Suk School of Medicine, and we get some talk about the magnificence of this planet. A lot of that is due to the excessive spending on the part of Hasik Corino III, the emperor, when the imperial seat was moved to Kaitain from Seleucus Secundus. The other thing that's interesting is that the weather on Kaitain is extremely temperate. Basically, it's very rarely seen to rain or storm, and that's not an accident. So there is a whole fleet of weather satellites controlling the weather in extreme detail. They can do things like ordering up a light dusting of rain with a rainbow if the emperor wants it. They can even create beautiful auroras using the satellites to ionize rare gases in the upper ionosphere. Planetologists who have tried to point out that this is probably a bad idea in the longer term usually find themselves fired or sent to Seleucus Secundus, or even worse. Then we got some details about Corinth City, the Imperial Palace, various and many rooms it contains, the Imperial Landsraad Commons, which we got some background in the Great Game, the Hasik III Center for the Performing Arts, which is the most prestigious stage. Then we have the Imperial Prison. So along with the entire planet of Seleucus Secundus, there also is another Imperial prison on Kaitain itself. This is a large gray stone structure. It's reachable by boat via a labyrinth of canals full of dead ends and bordered by high thorn hedges. The entrance is called Trader's Gate and is decorated with with the bloody yet preserved heads of 4 executed prisoners placed on high poles. The heads are hollowed out and fitted with glow globes, and they shine down like pale jack-o'-lanterns. That's pretty cool. Basically, the rooms inside are horrible, filled with mold. They're damp and dark, and, they're screaming sometimes in the corridors. So are they coming from torture chambers, or are they just recordings intended to make you fearful? Nobody really knows. And we have the Imperial Zoo, where animals are brought from all across the Imperium. We've got the Ishak Hall of Magnificent Documents, massive storehouse of constitutional documents, journals of past emperors. Then we have the Tipping Point, so the colloquial name for an unoccupied and distant area of the planet that courtly life has yet to reach. The weather control people use this part of the planet to balance the forces they hold in check and release some of the pent-up environmental stress in this uninhabited region. The technicians hope that nobody tries to build anything near there, because then they won't have anywhere left to release the atmospheric and environmental stress. Now we've got some great NPC templates for courtly types that you might find in Kaitain. First, we have this bodyguard here. So, of course, their primary drive is duty, with this drive statement of protecting my charge. Then their skill, their highest is in battle, with focuses in evasive action, unarmed combat. Talents in constantly watching. So when they attempt a skill test to detect danger or hidden enemies, they reduce difficulty by 2. And if you decide to keep the initiative by spending 2 momentum, they can actually increase the cost by 4. So it costs you 4 momentum. And they also have rapid recovery, which is not bold for some reason, but once per scene, they can add +2 to momentum in order to remove a complication which represents an injury. In addition, they can also avoid injury 1 more additional time during the conflict. Normally, you can just do that once. As assets, they have a defensive shield, a kinjal, and a mala pistol. And then they give some example bodyguards that you could use with some background and an interesting scenario hook as well, which is great. Then we've got a confidant. So these are domestic servants. They're loyal. Their highest drive is truth, with the statement, "A secret is sacred and dangerous." For skills, they're not good in battle, but they're good in communication and discipline. In communicate, they have the focuses of inspiration and listening, and discipline, composure. And they have the talent of passive scrutiny. So when the confidant enters a scene, they may ask one question of the players as if they'd spent momentum/threat to obtain information. They have as assets a cone of silence. We got aristocratic context and household goods. We got some example confidants. We got beautiful artwork here and a great scenario hook as well. Then we got a scheming noble. Really like the artwork here. Looks very severe. So their traits are aristocracy and ambitious. Their highest drive is power at 7, with the statement, "Ambition is rewarded." They have their greatest skills in communicate at 6, with their focus in deception, and understand, with a focus in house politics and imperial politics. And they have the very useful talent of subtle words. So when they attempt to communicate tasks, they can buy 1 or more dice by spending threat. And they may create a new trait for free on the character they've spoken to. So they can influence your thoughts or mood. Then we got some example scheming nobles and a scenario hook as well for them. We got the socialite, another great picture. Guy just chilling. Goblet of wine in his hand. His greatest drive is faith, believing most strongly in himself. And he's got skills highest to communicate at 7, with charm and listening as focuses. Understand is the other one, highest skill at 6, with a focus in imperial politics. And of course, he's wealthy and fashionable. Talent is hidden motives. So when an opponent fails to understand or communicate test against a socialite, the socialite may immediately create a trait which reflects a mistaken belief the target has about them. So they can deceive you with their charm and beguile you into believing something false. Got some example socialites again, and another excellent scenario hook. Very, very cool. And finally, we have the weak noble. So they're not as good as the scheming noble. Fortunately, this art is actually reused from the great game, but there is a lot of new artwork in this book, so I can't be bothered too much. But I do wish they had come up with a new bit of artwork here. Their highest drive is power at 7. I want it and I deserve it. Not very subtle. They're good at battle, actually, with dirty fighting and sneak attacks, and at movement with unobtrusive. Their traits are aristocrat and overwhelmed, so they're in over their heads. But they have the talent of cautious communicate. So when the noble attempts a test using communicate, and they buy additional d20s by spending momentum or threat, they can re-roll a single d20 in that dice pool. As assets, they have a defensive shield, bodyguards, and a slip tip. So there are a few examples of these and a nice scenario hook. So the idea is that the weak noble uses blunt instruments, fighting, sneak attacks, that kind of thing, and his bodyguards to try and get ahead, but he's not so skilled as to manipulate using pure intrigue like the scheming noble. Then we get into the Sardaukar. There's a fantastic illustration here of a Sardaukar with his 2 bloodied blades, clearly fresh from a battle with blood pooling around his boots. So first they talk about the prison planet of Seleucus Secundus. The population is now pretty much the prisoners and their guards. Once Seleucus Secundus was turned into the imperial prison planet, the population of the penal colony became hardened and adapted to the horrible radiation and the brutal environments that now presided over this planet, which had been bombed into oblivion. So the fighting prowess of those who survived in this prison became second to none. And of course, the Padisha emperors came to recognize that fact. They started to very quietly use these harsh conditions of their prison planet as a training ground for their troops. And that led to the birth of the Sardaukar. Some details here about the induction and training, which, as you suspect, is pretty tough. The mortality rate amongst new prisoners in the prison is a brutal 60%. So those prisoners who survive a few years are conditioned physically and mentally by their struggles, and that's where the Sardaukar start to pull their stocks from. Once the guards, who are themselves Sardaukar, deem a prisoner ready, they pull them from the routine, they take them to a place of special ceremony, and basically they have to kneel, and you can choose either what they call reprieve or mercy. So if you choose reprieve, then you begin your life in eternal servitude of the emperor. If you choose mercy, they give you a quick death. So then if you choose the reprieve, then you endure Sardaukar training, which is punishing in the extreme. You're drilled endlessly in every type of combat and portable weapons training, but with a certain emphasis on personal combat with shields and swords. So then when you graduate, you ritually take the life of a prisoner of Seleucus Secundus. The blood is drained into a communal basin and blessed by the presiding Burseg, welcomes them into the elite league of the Sardaukar. If you fail to reach the standard required, then you're sacrificed in one of many secret blood rituals. So besides being a Sardaukar, there are only two other officer grades. There's the Bashar and the Burseg. So Bashars are field commanders, so they're kind of commanding troops in the field. They can be generals on a strategic scale. And the Bursegs are kind of above that, so they oversee the deployment of whole legions, very rarely engage in personal combat themselves. But if they were to be in personal combat, they would of course be fantastically good at it, as they are still Sardaukar. So they talk about life amongst the Sardaukar. You're experts in an astonishing array of combat techniques. Some are specialized as well. So you might have particular skills in recon, building insurgency, assassination, that kind of stuff. And there's some great tips here about Sardaukar player characters. So you could play a whole campaign where everybody is Sardaukar, and that could be a really exciting and unique campaign filled with military action and excitement. With the popularity of military sci-fi these days, that could be a lot of fun. However, you could also have a Sardaukar character in a mixed group, because they could be there as a military advisor or a bodyguard, and also the eyes of the emperor due to their undying loyalty. They can never act against House Carino knowingly, but they can otherwise participate fully in the group. They give you a faction template for these. Of course, they have the additional trait of Sardaukar. They give you some suggested archetypes, which are all about fighting or strategist, tactician, warrior, etc. They have mandatory talents of unquestionable loyalty to House Carino only, and they can never take the dual fealty talents. So they never have dual allegiance. Then there's some new talents here, a bunch of them. So let's pick a few interesting ones. We've got Blood Ritual. So if you spend an action to anoint yourself with the blood of an enemy you have killed in this scene, you gain 2 momentum/threat. That's pretty badass. They do share some talents with Fremen, which is interesting, because Fremen are also fierce fighters. We've got, Fearsome Spectacle. If you defeat an enemy, the next attack action taken against that Sardaukar in the current scene automatically fails. If the Sardaukar is an NPC, this also generates 2 threat. That's really awesome. You can also have a Hidden Blade. You spend an action to create a blade asset for yourself only in any circumstance without the need for a test or momentum threat spend. Sacrifice, you may give an allied non-Sardaukar a wounded trait to gain 2 momentum and threat. So you're basically maneuvering somebody, using them as a human shield to give you an advantage. So you get the idea, they're really hardcore killers. Since they can be detached from the Sardaukar and sent out as bodyguards or military advisors, that really allows them an interesting position to play in a mixed campaign. Now we're into chapter 2, the Outsiders. So with the Tleilaxu epigram, interesting looking folk being surrounded by non-obvious technology. Not sure what it does. I guess they're in some kind of ship, vaguely. First, we talk about the world of Ix. It's the 9th world in the Al-Khalarap star system, a place of technological wonder and well-protected secrets, devastated during the Butlerian Jihad, so the people went all underground. The devastated surface has gradually recovered, but 90% of the Ixian population lives under the planet's surface. There's Butlerian edicts, so the chief focus is defined by the Orange Catholic Bible, which states, "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind." So that has led to the rise and development of mentats, the human computers of the setting. At various times during history, certain inventors amongst the Ixians have tried to bend these rules, and in fact, that was the eventual leading to the downfall of the House Vernius. So when the Tleilaxu claimed Vernius was conducting extensive research into thinking machines, they used that to justify an invasion. So there are eyes watching Ix for signs of breaking the edicts, but it's very difficult to determine whether they're actually doing so or not. Then we have just some details on the government of Ix. In the early days, there was House Vernius, and it rose to become one of the most influential and respected of the great houses. Then they fell out with the Emperor, made enemies of the Tleilaxu, and they were forced to go renegade. So eventually they restored its status, but they lost much of its power, with its heads becoming puppets of the Technocrat Council, a sort of group of technological inventors and research conglomerates. They don't possess the ability to utterly depose their ruling house, but it severely limits the house's power. So this is the way that the Emperor has allowed them to survive, but sort of remain under their thumb. So the government of Ix is sometimes referred to as the Confederacy. Interesting sidebar here about Ixian player characters, which I'm not sure I'm 100% down with, because I always prefer, the rule books give you some actual rules on stuff. Basically, it says you're free to create characters from Ixian agents of House Vernius, and the same as any other player character, but it's rare for an Ixian to serve with another house. So while there's no Ixian faction template, such characters should be treated as faction characters in terms of loyalty. They have the same range of abilities and skills as any other house agent, but they tend to have more focus on science and technology. They may even have a secret connection to the Tleilaxu, and they may be allowed such access to special Ixian devices as assets if the GM allows it. So it's a little bit too general for me. I would have preferred an actual faction template. It would just feel that an Ixian player character was more of an option, I think. So then we have some details about the planet. So Ixian Majoris is basically the large modern spaceport. From there is the great underground metropolis of Vernii. So the nobility and other elevated groups live on the upper levels, and their subordinates populate the lower regions. And then diamond pillars and other geological wonders serve as decoration and structure for the city. And moving about, you have a mixture of aerial transports, walkways, lifts, and tunnels. Then you have the Grand Palais of Ix, the residence of the ruling house. Carved from subterranean rock and reinforced against attack, it's a vast fortress made to serve and protect the ruling house and its members' most valued attendants. Among the most secure and impressive structures in the known universe. It's strong enough and secure enough that it could even be hosting the Emperor and be considered appropriate lodgings. Then we have the Ixian shipyards. This is situated on the largest moon, Caliburn, though there are some supplementary facilities and factories on nearby artificial moons. So here they produce guild hayliners and personal shuttlecraft and all manner of spacecraft. Again, if you're looking from the outside, it looks like nobody lives on these moons, but all the work is done inside. There's no exterior facilities. Hayliners leave the interiors using their fold space drives, but there are also secret doors that can be opened, disguised volcanoes and caves and so on. Then we've got other production facilities. None of the moons of Ix are natural, but nevertheless a sixth moon. Each of them does different stuff. So we know that there are shipyards on Caliburn. We know that Durendal is home to House Aldrich, devoted to developing security and surveillance technologies. The other moon purposes we don't know, so the GMs can have some fun with that. The rulers of Ix also control some other territory, most notably the Petra system. So there they have research stations and the home of Minor House Randall. So they use Petra 2 and 3 as a basis for illicit research into forbidden topics, chief among them the creation of new thinking machines. Finally, we have the suboids. So much of the menial labor and unsavory work on Ix is performed by the suboids. They're a class of genetically crafted humans whose will has been undermined and broken through centuries of conditioning and oppression. So they rose up at one point due to the influence of face dancer infiltrators and helped overthrow their rulers during the Tleilaxu invasion, but they were quickly pacified and returned to servitude. They're not really suitable for player characters unless you have a particularly heroic or independent offshoot of a suboid. These are very rare and would be seen as extremely dangerous by the Ixian superiors, so you'd have to get the hell out of there really quickly. Then there's some new equipment and tech that you can get from Ix. So there's some cool stuff here, like an advanced hunter seeker. So they're more effective than normal hunter seekers, and they're better at targeting those standing still or otherwise avoiding detection, but they still require an operator. So they have keywords remote operated, stealthy, and self-correcting, so they can adjust to targets that are trying to avoid them. We also have the advanced hayliner. This is quite a controversial one because the way that taxation works is that imperial taxation on space flights is based on the number of trips you make instead of the actual amount of cargo. And advanced hayliners can carry an additional 16% more cargo. The Emperor isn't happy about that because obviously they get less taxation while the Ixians in the guild benefit from that reduction in cost. But some of these are still being used and they would cost the throne untold revenue. So you still need a navigator to operate it, but I mean, you could definitely get a very high price for it. It's got a bunch of keywords: efficient carrier, FTL travel, immense, navigator required, and advanced spacecraft. We got the Mockingbird field, which is really cool. So instead of a traditional voice dampener that just makes your, like a cone of silence that makes your conversations quieter, what it does is it actually twists the audio of your conversation into something entirely different. People can still eavesdrop on you and it sounds normal, but what you're saying has no relationship to what you're actually saying. And it actually takes quite a degree of skill to understand what's being said. And of course, the higher the quality of this asset, the more difficult it's going to be to work out that it is in fact a mockbird field and not a real conversation. It has keywords of disguise, privacy, and technological. Then we've got the Ixian Shiv. So this is a specially designed assassin's blade, which is really disturbing. The Ixians tried to make a artificial version of the Fremen crysknife, which is extremely effective, of course. But what they ended up with was this crystalline blade. So what happens is when you stab somebody with it, the handle detaches and the blade is left inside the wound, and a special sealant on the handle closes the entry wound. Then the crystalline blade fragments and spreads throughout the interior of the body, doing tons of internal damage, causing internal bleeding and trauma, and eventually the crystalline fragments will fade, leaving no trace. So as an asset, this device turns a defeat involving the weapon into a deadly or permanently disabling one unless expert medical care is used to save the target. Detecting the cause of death is also difficult, requiring expert examination. It has the keywords of concealable, melee weapon, and disposable. Really cool tech here. Then we got the suboid myrmidons. So due to the cost and time involved in producing such a force, this asset is theoretical. However, there's this idea that you could take physically promising suboids and use advanced training methods to condition them for hostility and battlefield adaptability, which would allow the Ixians to have a force of expendable and elite warriors. So if you had an asset of these, they would function much like any house's elite forces. Their unusual experience, muted emotions, and generations of conditioning would make for great obedience. However, they would be bad at improvisation and tactical awareness. Got keywords of melee weapons, subliminal conditioning, shock troops, and shielded, and a quality of 2 straight away, or 3 with technological enhancement. Then we have the face masks. So this is an advanced sheath of morphogenic pseudo-flesh based on Tleilaxu technology, and it can be programmed to simulate a single individual's face seamlessly. Unfortunately, you have to remove it and refresh the programming every 72 hours, or it begins to slip and lose integrity. So it's not as good as having a face dancer. It also won't defeat full body examinations because it covers only the face. Keywords disguise, infiltration, and technological. They note here in the GMing section, which is brief but to the point, that basically you don't want tech to override ingenuity in your players and reduce every intrigue conflict down to, who has the best gadget for assassination or whatever. You should make sure that technology feels appropriately rare and is appropriately powerful, and that getting a hold of one of these things is a whole quest in and of itself, really. Then we get into the Bene Tleilax, otherwise known as the Tleilaxu. So they're an order of biologists with an almost cult-like society. These are really interesting ones. So they have this banner with the beetle here. We see a very creepy looking dude here with a cane. So they control only a single planet and have no outsiders as a general rule. They'll occasionally allow visitors to arrange deals, but they typically operate on a mail order basis. So you tell them, I want thing X, they tell you the price, and then they send it to you. They tend to be unusual to negotiate with. They'll quote a price, but if they think they'll lose the sale, they're quick to offer a deal too low to ignore, but they often have some strings attached. The Tleilax is actually one of the more pleasant planets in the Imperium, which kind of defies most people's expectations. They expect it to be like a horror show of genetic manipulation failures, but actually the researchers are not really interested in large-scale industry. They're just focused on genetics and biology, and they need biological materials for their experiments. So the natural environment of the planet is actually flourishing quite a bit. The arable land covers a lot of the surface, and it's quite beautiful. There are some industrial areas. Some of those areas, they actually encourage pollution, the Bene Tleilax, because they think it might help the plants to evolve into interesting new forms for their experiments. There are very few individuals who occasionally live on Tleilax for a while, but they're never really given much access, so they're only given the ability to access certain special and separate quarters in the capital city of Bandalong. They can't mix with the people of Tleilax in any way. They're made to feel so unwelcome that very few outsiders really stay if they have any other choice. Which is, a pretty effective way to go about things. Now, if you are in one of the extremely rare cases where you end up staying long-term on Tleilax and you're trusted enough, then you'll be moved to the city of Thaladay. You'll be given a little more freedom, but you'll be reminded every day that you're an outsider, and they only allow you there at their whim. And it's the training ground of the Twisted Mentats, so it has an impressive cloning facility. Then it goes on to describe the different castes of society on Tleilax. So there's basically the ruling caste of the Tleilaxu Masters, who spend most of their time managing production facilities or performing experiments, and they're about 10% of the population, but they have all the power and all the wealth. Then the ordinary folk are oppressed, but their life is actually reasonably pleasant. They're not openly brutalized and turned into slaves and stuff by like the Harkonnens on Gaiety Prime. Most of them are farmers, craftspeople, marketeers, stuff like that. The real issue is that if you are a regular person on Tleilax, there's always the possibility that they might just grab you up for human experimentation, and there's nothing you can do about it. Basically, very few who are seized up for experimentation ever return. Some do, but most do not, and it's especially true of women, which we'll get to more of that later. So the capital city of Bandalong is where the Masters live, and that city is quite large. Mainly it's one of the few that exist on the planet in the first place, but it's also a holy place, so the masters definitely want to live and work there. Everything has the feel of a laboratory with clean, empty spaces and functional architecture. The Tleilaxu themselves are ruled by a single council of mashaykhs who have only a single building to meet in, and effectively governed by one rule: do what the masters tell you. Tleilaxu religion, so with their focus on biology and research, it'd be easy to assume they're ruled as a scientocracy. However, they're actually a theocracy because they consider their work to be a holy calling, which is quite interesting. So their faith is absolute and inviolate as far as they're concerned. They consider their work to be holy and the capital city of Bandalong to be sacred. This is their root of their xenophobia because they consider all non-believers to be unworthy. So their faith is complex. It melds science and religion. It's kind of natural if you think about it, because they can create life through the form of clones and golas. So they might think that they are, performing the work of God by doing such things. But instead, it's not just that simple. They view God in science and see science as a way to worship and understand the divine. Then we get into the face dancers, who are one of the well-known parts of the Dune setting, and perhaps the most significant role within the Bene Tleilaxu people know about. So face dancers are biologically crafted entertainers, technically, who mimic others as part of their performance, and they do so flawlessly. They can dance and perform, mimic guests and celebrities, they can flatter, satirize, or both. They have the same control over their body, their skeletal structure, their fat deposits, everything that a Bene Gesserit has with their prana bindu conditioning, but it's much more focused on the physical. It notes that they can change gender at will, down to the point that even if you get one of them in bed, they can be fully functional, as the Commander Data would say. They have a natural form, which is just sort of a soft-looking humanoid with no real distinguishing features. If you kill a face dancer that doesn't have the ability to maintain their form even while unconscious, which is a talent you can't take, then they will revert to that form. So that's one way to find out if they're a face dancer. But some of them might not even be revealed, because you'll kill them and they'll be locked to the last form that they took. So this is a very, very powerful thing to be, as you can imagine, when you're dealing with intrigue. It's a fear for many that they could be simply replaced by a face dancer at any moment and just disappear forever. And nobody else but the Bene Tleilaxu can create them. So they're exceptionally rare. But they don't get used that often, really, because it's hard work to do and it's a lot of work to maintain. Most face dancers just imitate lesser known people because they're less likely to be found out. It takes a little bit less effort, and then gradually get closer to a target, observe them a lot, so when it comes time to actually replace somebody important, they've got all the information they need to be a flawless duplicate. And then we get to play as one. This is amazing. So I don't know if any of you have seen the Glass Cannon Network. I think it's 10 episode long campaign of Dune. They created their own template for a face dancer, which worked well enough, but this is much more detailed. Obviously, this is a great selling point for the book. I think a lot of people would want to play a face dancer, especially after watching that campaign. So a face dancer has the additional trait of Tleilaxu, of course. Suggested archetypes: athlete, envoy, infiltrator, scout, or spy. Their mandatory talents include face dance and muscular conditioning. So face dance, basically at the start of a scene, you can choose to alter your form. You can make yourself taller, shorter, heavier, thinner, alter your skin color, your age, your gender, even to close scrutiny, in parentheses, in any combination. It's almost impossible for someone to determine who you truly are. So if you attempt to mimic someone specific and try to fool someone who knows that person, they may attempt an understand contest opposed by your discipline to detect your deceit. You can only copy the form of the person, not their mannerisms. If you want to copy their mannerisms, you need the copy talent up here, which is also face dancers only. The other mandatory talent is muscular conditioning. So whenever you attempt a move or discipline test which relies on control of your body, you may reroll a single d20. You can perfectly control your breathing, heart rate, and your internal organs. It's functionally identical to prana bindu conditioning, but it only applies to bodily function, muscle, and nerve control, and not biochemistry. But there's other great talents here too. Of course, copy is a really good one to have because combined with the mandatory face dance ability, you can copy the mannerisms as well of somebody else. You can also take an instant form, which is useful if you want to copy somebody who would be sort of background character in a gathering of nobles or something like that. That can be really useful. You can also take lightning reflexes, which the Bene Gesserit also have. You can spend one momentum to take your action first in any given round, regardless of the actual order. If two characters have this ability, it's up to the GM which goes first. But it doesn't give you any more action than you ordinarily have. It just lets you jump in at the first of the round, regardless of what anybody else is going to do. Lock features, one I mentioned before, so you can maintain the last form you took even when you're unconscious or dead. So that's really cool because even if you get murdered, that doesn't necessarily mean the opponent who suspected you as a face dancer can actually prove it, because you'll still look the same as the form that you took when you died. You can also choose the right moment. You get a bonus if you initiate a combat. So for the first attack, if no one else has made an attack, you can roll a full dice pool of 5d20 for no cost. However, anything that comes from that roll doesn't give you any momentum. You can also do unobtrusive change. So when you're in a crowd, you can make subtle and quick changes and make yourself hard to follow or spot, which is awesome. So basically, if somebody's trying to chase you and you have that talent, and there's a crowd around you, then the chasing you down becomes one difficulty level harder. It's very cool. You can also be twisted mentats as well. So standard mentat training gives a certain code of ethics in its students, and they need to tell and understand the truth so they don't make mistakes. But Stalaxu have found a way to train mentats without this moral code, without making them less efficient. So that means they can be, they can use emotions like cruelty and deceit when constructing plans and offer much more despicable and horrific advice. They're really good for, House Harkonnen and other twisted, gruesome houses like Bene Tleilax itself. Most houses would prefer the regular mentats if they're not particularly horrible. So they have twisted mentat talents for themselves. So any mentat can use the talents that have the mentat talent, but if it says twisted mentat, you have to be a twisted mentat for that. As an example, you can use, as a twisted mentat, calculated distress. So when a plan you're a part of is resolved, you may impose a negative emotional trait on one of your opponents to represent the stress you've caused them. They have exit trance, which is shared with regular mentats. You have a mental map as well. Triumph of Reason is a specifically non-twisted mentat talent. So you can meditate to remove a single emotional trait, either permanently or for the next scene. So you can completely remove negative traits like anger or fear. You can also have a true agenda, so you can obtain information about the true intentions of a negotiation opponent. And then we have some details about the Tleilaxu Masters as well. I'm going to leave that sort of in the dark for now because I think it's more fun to discover that during the course of play. And then we got some more details on the Swordmasters of Ginaz. So they appear in the Dune Core rulebook, and there's a decent amount of detail there, but there's some more here. So we've got some history of the warlike structure of the Ginaz society and how it evolved over time. And some details on the planet itself. So its star system is the Ginaz system. In the Junagad system, Richelieu sector, they've got one moon. It's a habitable class 5 planet, and it's home to House Ginaz, which is now defunct at a certain point in the timeline. Population is relatively light and mostly dwells on islands. You can see it's kind of a water-based world here. It gives an overview, a history of the planet, and the rise and fall of House Ginaz. So the Ginaz school had comprehensive records of all of its graduates, including their personal information, but the vaults just have outlived the house itself, and they are still remaining intact and are used as the core by which the Ginaz school continues to train new cadets. So, and they mention in the sidebar here what happens to the school in different eras of play. So in the Butlerian Jihad, the Ginaz are a very powerful mercenary cult, but they haven't quite formed their proper school yet. During Reconstruction, after the Jihad, they formed a full school, learning the techniques taught by their early master Chiroks, and begun to teach their ways to others for a price. During the Imperium, the Ginaz school has suffered near destruction in the War of Assassins against House Mauritani, considerably reduced in influence, and is trying to recover, but may not do so. Past that, with the ascension of Wadib, the Ginaz school is basically superfluous. It's only remembered by the Duncan Idaho Gola. So, again, a bit of spoilers there, but pretty much shouldn't spoil too much, given you won't know what any of those words mean until you get beyond the first book. And they talk about the details of Swordmaster training. So there are levels of proficiency, from 0 being a mere cadet and 10 being the highest level of achievement. And once you've reached that landmark, you're considered a graduate. So then you're given the official Swordmaster title. You can then be sort of working for other houses. And they are the finest warriors in all the Imperium, greater and more competent even than the Emperor's feared Sardaukar, although there's a lot less of them. So that's what kind of balances that out. The Emperor has a lot of Sardaukar, and there's not many Ginaz Swordmasters. There's a faction archetype here for cadets. So here you can be somebody who's qualified for the school, but you haven't graduated yet. So you got the trait of Ginaz. You can be a duelist, protector, or warrior. Your mandatory talent would be a weapon focus, and you may not begin play with Swordmaster talents, but you can learn them during the course of play. If you play as a Swordmaster from the beginning, you've already graduated from the school. You've reached the 10th level. Your additional trait is Ginaz Swordmaster, and then you can be a commander, duelist, protector, sergeant, strategist, tactician, or warrior. Your mandatory talent would be Master of Battle, and at least one other Swordmaster talent, but no more than 3. And there's some new ones here as well, so Always Armed is a good one. So if you're unarmed in a scene, you can create a quality 0 melee weapon asset for free, and with no test or action cost during any conflict, so it could be anything. It could be a Blur of Blades, so you move your melee weapon instantly, bypassing any defense your opponent may have in the facing guard position. So you can move a weapon into duel or skirmish 2 zones instead of 1. Battle Perception, you can't be surprised or ambushed. Additionally, if you have a weapon available, you do not need to spend an action or suffer a penalty to ready it. Blade Master, you get +1 quality to any melee weapon asset you have, but it can't be going beyond 4. It also applies to assets created by the use of talent momentum. That's very cool if you pair it with Always Armed. So you can end up with a quality 1 melee weapon, even if you're unarmed at the scene. Then there's Combat Meditation. So So there are 3 parts of combat meditation apparently: Finestus, Partus, and Novellus, becoming a whirlwind and unpredictable engine of destructive force. Every point of momentum you spend for any reason additionally increases the difficulty for anyone to strike you by +1 to a maximum of +3. Makes you much harder to hit. We have even more here, Lightning Strike, so if you're not surprised or ambushed, you have a free action on the first round of combat, in addition to your normal action that round. Master of Battle, so at the onset of any skirmish or warfare conflict, the Swordmaster may observe the situation, the intended foes, and the field where battle will occur. As an action, they may attempt a difficulty 1 battle test, prior to and apart from any test related to the conflict itself. Any momentum gained becomes a separate pool that may be spent freely during that conflict, but only by the Swordmaster. Very cool. You can have the Soul of a Swordmaster. It's only available to full Swordmasters. Official graduates cannot be taken by students or cadets. Basically, when dealing with others of the Ginaz school, you reduce the difficulty by 1 step for any social tests. Additionally, if one of your dice in a battle test rolls a 1, you gain an additional point of momentum. Steel Focus, get a bonus point of determination as soon as any physical conflict, so duel, skirmish, or warfare begins. Point is removed at the end of the conflict, whether it's been spent or not. Remember, determination allows you to re-roll your entire dice pool, or to just set a dice having rolled a 1 straight away. Get 2 successes right off the bat. Then they talk about Swordmaster campaigns. This can be quite an interesting experience, they say. So it's not a house-based campaign so much. Player characters are assumedly part of a house or allied with it. The Ginaz school is a melting pot for students from a variety of houses. Most, if not all, of the players should be Ginaz students, not graduates, and use that archetype. If you want to do an all-Ginaz campaign, and you might have some people who even have a bit of Mentat or Bene Gesserit training, or even some with training from the Sook School or the Spacing Guild. And then there's tips on how to actually go from cadet to Swordmaster, but it's quite difficult to do so. Basically, it takes a long time. You'll have to qualify, and it will take basically setting yourself apart from the rest of the characters for a long time, generally 5 years or more. So you need to give that player another character to play until their Swordmaster hopefully graduates. So then they give some ways of how to track the training of a player character using the house management system, again from the Great Game. So one of many reasons you'll find in this book where having the Great Game is useful. And again, it's quite difficult. You've got dire battle tests to prove your skills and graduate. So it's difficulty 4. There's some examples here of famous Swordmasters. Again, I'll leave these for your own discovery. Of course, Duncan, Idaho, from the movies, but there are others here as well. Now we get into the Sook School. We've got the Black Diamond. So this is the order which creates the Sook Doctors. So they are known for their supposedly unbreakable imperial conditioning, and few great houses are without a Sook Doctor as part of their court, because they're valuable advisors, and they have deep philosophical education as well as medical training. Then we have a history of them. They date all the way back to 110 BG. So then, after the Butlerian Jihad, Dr. Sook and Raquel Berto Unreal were forced to flee the ominous scourge virus that was running rampant on Parmentier, and then they tried to establish a school of medicine, which was destroyed by zealots, and then they formed the Humanities Medical Commission by 107 BG, and then eventually after the Rossack epidemic in 88 BG, Dr. Sook was inspired to create what would be recognized in time as the Sook Medical School, headquartered on Seleucus Secundus. So there's an interesting sidebar here about people not quite understanding how it is that the Sook doctors claim to be holding this medical oath of doing no harm, yet they won't extend any credit or do any treatment until they've been paid. And the way they reconcile that here is by saying that basically Sook doctors, because they're so trusted and so rare, they typically work for extremely wealthy people and houses. So they charge a ransom for treatment, basically. And they know that their employers can pay it. However, they're also known for giving medical expertise away and rendering humanitarian aid for free to poor planets. So basically, they scale their fees dependent on the relative wealth of their clients. So if they see a disaster unfolding, a pandemic or epidemic on a poor world, they may very well assist for no cost at all. But if a great house asks for their assistance, they will charge an arm and a leg and then some. Of course, I prefer the NHS model of, everything should be free at the point of service, but, we're in a feudal system here, so we can't expect much better than this. Then they talk about the rigorous training of the Sook School and the imperial conditioning that was developed by Dr. Mohandas Sook and has been refined, so it uses years of active and passive psychosomatic manipulation with drugs, prana-bindu manipulation, and subliminal indoctrination. The success rate is high, with only a small percentage being mentally damaged enough not to be able to function. Then they have a sidebar here on breaking imperial conditioning, which was thought to be impossible until it was used by the Baron and his twisted mentat, Peter de Vries. In game terms, it would be an extended action, require access to the individual, and you'd have to manipulate them somehow through drugs, torture, blackmail, etc. And it would be an epic difficulty 5 communication test to really break the conditioning. If the conditioning is happening normally, though, the Sook graduate is unable to cause harm to other human beings or knowingly take actions that will result in harm, and has never been known to fail, except in this very notable case here. Then we have ranks and roles in the Sook School. So you have the Initiate. They wear white robes, no other adornments, and they mostly study and perform light chores. You got the Researchers, who wear lab coats. They lead or assist in various research projects. Clinicians have a doctor's robe and coat with a mark of the Sook School. So after completing medical school at the Sook School, they're expected to practice medicine for a period of 3 to 5 years as a clinician. Next up is Proctor. So they have administrative roles. So those who don't become doctors end up serving the Sook School in the capacity of proctors. They have their own ranks like Dean, Headmaster, Teacher, Invigilator, etc. And they run the Sook School in an admin capacity, and many are also subject area experts, so they teach in those fields of medicine. And then we have the doctors. So they wear a doctor's robe coat with an insignia of the Sook School. They're recognized as a full doctor, highly valued, but only a select few will be invited from this group to the inner school to be able to become Sook doctors. So Sook doctors have unshorn hair worn in a ponytail bound by a silver ring and a diamond tattoo on the forehead. It's the highest rank and only granted to those that can pass the imperial conditioning. These select few are highly valued in the Imperium and occupy important positions in most noble houses. We've got some new talents for Sook doctors. They're not all exclusive. So academic excellence, basically, for any test requiring study, it takes you half the time and the difficulty reduced by 1. Bedside manner is for Sook doctors only. So if you want to gain the trust of someone, you reduce the test difficulty by 1. Cybernetic surgeons for anyone, basically once per scene you can repair or fix any damaged cybernetics full functionality, and in extended game time you can perform the surgery needed to implant cybernetics. Sook doctors can do empathetic diagnostics, so by using just their sense of touch and intuition you can examine a patient and diagnose their problems without the need of medical scanners or equipment. If you have access to equipment, the talent lowers the difficulty of the test by 1. They also have the Sook doctor improvised medicine talent, so you can create medicine from common household chemicals, natural flora or fauna, and use that to heal most afflictions or battlefield wounds, including poisons. Any difficulty penalty for using primitive or substandard medical assets is reduced by 1. You can also be a medical director, but that's for anyone, not just Sook doctors. So during a warfare conflict, you can restore 1 unit asset to the conflict at the cost of 1 momentum. Finally, you can be a researcher, which again is for anyone. In an extended research task, you may add +1 to the quality of the asset you use for the duration of the test. Then we got some medical assets for Sook doctors. These are really cool. So you have the handheld medical scanner. So it can be used to scan a patient for vital readings, analyze chemicals. It can also be configured to act as a poison snooper. Greatly enhances the doctor's ability to perform diagnostics as an asset, and you don't need to wait for lab results. It has keywords medical detection and technology. You also have a medical kit, which is a standard item carried by most field medics and Sook doctors. It has sutures, bandages, needles, medicine, and other equipment, and basically you can do field medicine and first aid anywhere. And has the keywords first aid and survival. If you have a laboratory, you have access to or own a secure lab in which to do research experiments and even create small batches of medicine, poison, weapons, or other small gadgets. It could be a room aboard your ship, a tower of your house's castle, the basement of an office building, wherever. As an asset, you can perform a wide variety of research and produce chemical compounds. Keywords of equipment and research. You can also have a pharmaceutical factory. So this is kind of a subtype of a laboratory, a full-scale manufacturing plant that can produce copious amounts of medicine, spice derivatives, and other finished chemical goods that are a source of wealth and influence for your house. So that allows you as an asset to create large-scale pharmaceuticals, possibly adding wealth to the house. Gives you the keywords of manufacture, trade goods, and medicine. You can also have a hospital ship. So this is a spaceship with medical equipment, labs, surgery theaters, and 24 or so trained personnel to handle a wide variety of medical issues. The ship is capable of orbit and can travel aboard a Highliner. You can also make planetfall and set up as a field hospital to address local emergencies. It's got the keywords of transport, shielded, and medical. Then we got some info on cybernetic assets, which is quite interesting. So they're a little bit contentious. When does a person become more machine than human and thus classified as thinking machine? You know, it's not very clear where that line is. It's a bit of a ship of Theseus kind of problem. But there are a lot of people in the Imperium who do have cybernetics, and research continues on cybernetics. And the Sook have perfected the art of artificial limbs, eyes, organs, etc. And even brain augmentation has been pursued, which again is leaning perilously close to AI, forbidden by the Butlerian edicts. So then we have some discussion about cybernetic assets. So the keyword implant can be applied to any asset to make it available to the character as a cybernetic asset. So that can be personal weapons, shields, communication devices, and most poisons, drugs, and medical dispensers. And you can also apply the keyword hidden to have it available, concealed within an artificial limb or organ so as to be visually undetectable. You can even have exotic implants like suspensor fields, like we see on the Baron Harkonnen, jetpacks, and larger assets, if the GM allows it. For all their potency, however, you can't heal these naturally, so if a cybernetic implant is damaged, you need a skilled cyberneticist to fix them. In In this way, the Game Master can insist that certain negative traits relating to damaged cybernetics cannot be removed without the right skills and equipment available. They urge caution, of course, on how far you let players go down this road, but they give a nice example character here. So Romber Vernius, the Earl of Ix, a notable supporting character. He's got a drive of 8 in duty, freedom of Ix at all cost, and justice of 7, right will prevail in the end. He's got a battle of 6 with cybernetic limbs, and a move of 7, untiring. So he's got some interesting talents here. He's driven, spend 3 threat for 1 point of determination, and roll 1d20. If he rolls equal to or under his discipline rating by itself, he immediately regains the spent threat. He has improvised weapons, because most of his limbs are artificial, and they can be used as weapons themselves. So once per scene, he can create a quality 0 asset at no cost that he can use in a personal or skirmish conflict. He can also recover quickly with rapid recovery. So we saw this with the Sardaukar as well. Assets of being armored and a stronger cybernetic body. Now we get into society. So we can see nobles carousing, goblets of interesting liqueurs from across the known universe. And this is more about how to engage in a political campaign. So the first part of this chapter is more for the player's eyes. Doing a political campaign is not obvious how to proceed in many cases. So they start from first principles here. So you have to understand the nature of the game you're about to play. Your enemies will do whatever it takes to win, including kill. Houses will play against each other, play opposing families against each other, make friends turn on other friends, and hand knives to lovers to use in moments of passion. There are very few rules in this kind of game, and winning always has a cost. That's very important. And the main tip they give here is verify then trust, not trust then verify. That's awful advice. You should do the opposite. Make sure information that you get is from 2 independent sources at least. Have your own sources of information as well, particularly primary sources. Try and record important conversations. If you receive information that a third party is plotting something, go to them and confirm it. The next big tip is trust motives, not friendships. So friendships can be broken. They can be manipulated. People can be conditioned. They can be turned against you in various different ways. So you can't rely on friendship as the sole reason why somebody might stay loyal to you. You need to think about their motives and what they really want to achieve. That could potentially put them in conflict with their friendship, then view them with suspicion. Here's a good bit here about if you've never played a political game before and you're not sure exactly where to start, then they give you some ideas on how to begin, basically. So a political game is no different from any other kind of game. You need 3 elements: a character with a desire, the object of the desire, and the obstacle standing between them. Then you start to use politics to try and get around that, and that naturally leads you into a political campaign. And then the next step is to determine where the threat's power comes from, and a good way to do that is to build an organization map for the foe. This is something that they show off in the Game Master's Toolkit. So I'll just remind you, we've looked at that before, but there are a few examples of intrigue maps here that we can look at. So they give some nice examples for the GM to pull out in case of emergencies. So here we have, for example, intrigues to use in your games. So the first one is Bene Gesserit's Missionaria Protestiva are looking to craft a new superstition to manipulate Fremen society that demons live among humans. So there are various people with their relationships and links between them and their relation to Sich Toma, which is the target of where they're trying to instigate this belief. So that's a relatively simple influence map. And now we're getting a bit more complicated here with Bene Tlailochs. They're trying to uncover the secrets of the Bene Gesserit breeding program. So we have this person here who controls nameless Samutaden, which is a location, and he has blackmail material on this guy here, security chief, flatters this person, and both of them meet at this Samutaden controlled by this individual. And then we have the security chief betraying this baronet over here. So we're starting to see that relationships can be multi-directional. You can have relationships with multiple people and places at once. And again, here we see that with a spice operation intrigue map. So we have an individual who is linked as a lover with Colstera, who this person works for them, but they work for Barra Paris, who runs the Clippers group. They're a senior member of it, and they're a member of it. And this person runs the cleaning crews. This intrigue map is a way that you can uncover who is in charge of who and what these different factions are up to. Finally, we have Children of the Jihad. So the Ixians seek to scavenge the remains of an ancient spaceship that they believe housed one of the legendary thinking machines that they thought were wiped out during the Butlerian Jihad. So here we have another multi-directional map. We have an agent of Ix who's responsible for retrieving this spacecraft. We have the spacecraft ruins location. He knows the location, as does this person, Gao. This individual is watching this agent of Ix and captain is trying to follow them to this ruin, presumably. And the spacecraft ruin is near to Sietch Faris. And then we have tribe members here, Gao and Kulul, and they are trying to reclaim this siege at the same time. So you can see that, building up an intrigue map like that really can help you to think about, there's a lot of different possible interesting characters and interesting links between them, and you can develop that on the fly. It doesn't have to be something that you set out at the beginning. As your players move their way through the political campaign, trying to unfold and unlock different ways to exert influence on people, you can allow them to build up their own intrigue map, or you can build one up carefully behind your GM screen. Use that as prompts to get your players to look in certain directions. So a really, really useful thing in a political game to work on an intrigue map. You can also allow the players to have agency in that as well, in the development of that map. Finding out all this information that you would get on an intrigue map and that kind of stuff is going to require a lot of effort and a lot of skillful negotiation and intrigue, making bargains and that sort of stuff. And the players need to create plans to get these things. The game master shouldn't feel the need to just reveal info to the players at no cost. They may need to help out occasionally, like get an NPC into the scene who can get them a vital piece of information that they seem to be overlooking. So then once the characters have a sense of the structure that they're facing, they'll need to start planning how to undermine that structure. So that could be bribing people, that could be breaking conditioning, that could be developing blackmail, assets, and leverage on certain parts of the organizational structure. And then once you plan all that, you need to actually do it, and that's where things get really dangerous. The enemy might act against you at the same time. They may catch wind of your plans. Lots of interesting things can happen once the plan actually gets into motion. And of course, there will be a resistance and response from the targets of your plans. So these various examples here are drawn from the plot of Dune, which I won't repeat to avoid too much spoilerage. And of course, no plan survives contact with the enemy, right? So you should always have contingencies. If something goes wrong with an initial attack or initial strike, make sure you have a backup. And also make sure that you sometimes use feints and thrusts, look like you're about to do something and then attack somewhere else. You could send a doomed spy. So a spy that will be caught, and they'll be interrogated, and while that's happening, your real spies will be doing something much more skillfully. You'll be able to achieve, through distraction, your goals by sending in this kind of feint in the wrong direction. Then we have a great section for the GM, so you're going to set up a political campaign, and if you've never done it before, it can be quite daunting, and this has some great advice. So first, you need to think about the scale of the campaign. It could be the whole Imperium, which is the universal scale. It could be the Landsraad scale, so focusing on a conflict between 2 or 3 of the great houses. That's the scale that the adventure example adopts in the book, which is really useful. So then, they talk about the idea of the political thriller. The politics of the game should feel exciting. It should be deadly. It should be, filled with potential missteps that could lead to disaster. That's really important to remember. Games without combat don't have to be boring. And that's something that, is particularly true in the context of Dune, where you have so many interesting factions with clashing goals, with shared needs, with monopolies that they need to contend with over spice and space travel that are shared by every house. So there's common ground, there's uncommon ground. There's a million different ways things can go depending on which levers you pull at in your campaign and what your players choose to do. And that should give the players a tremendous sense of agency and also risk and threat, which I think is fantastic. The Landsraad should not feel safe. The Emperor's Court should not feel safe. There should always be the threat of things going terribly wrong hovering over you as you're trying to make friends and influence people. Having a counterplot is pretty cool as well. So don't just focus on, getting the characters to plot goals and then they go ahead and do it and it's all finished. I mean, the enemy is also smart and has their own goals in mind, and they should be doing counterplotting. And especially if they happen to find out, if players slip up, then they may start to act in direct opposition, or they may act through a proxy. So a lot of interesting ways that could unravel the players' plans, and they'd have to adapt on the fly, and it can become a real mess. Also, twists and revelations are fun, but you don't want to do too many of them. You don't want to say, ha, so-and-so was a traitor the whole time, screw you. Once or twice could be cool, but there should be some foreshadowing. There should be some ways that players could get a wind of it and maybe avoid it. You want to give the players the sense that they could have triumphed in some way, or at least avoided the worst of it. And there's some great words of wisdom here, so remember that you shouldn't do anything for free, and you shouldn't take anything for free. There's always something to be paid, a price of some kind. Always verify the payment if you're the one providing the service, and if you're the one receiving it, always look out for that cost. Every action that you take, you're putting your neck on the line, potentially. Every action in the Landsraad has a consequence. Every action has a reaction. So GMs need to take that into account, and so do players. Another great tip is show only what needs to be seen. When you want somebody to believe you on something, show them the absolute minimum amount you can to get them to buy the story. Never show them more than they really need to know. So leave out details that they don't need to know and that don't help you out, and give them only details that you want them to know, and give them some facts that are not in your favor, so that makes it more believable, but always be careful with that. And the old principle of the shit sandwich method, so you take two truths and stick a lie in the middle. Right? That works with criticism as well. You'd say two nice things and put the criticism in the middle. And here's a similar principle with intrigue. So let's slip two things that they know to be true and have a third lie in there somewhere that they don't necessarily know about. And they'll be more likely to believe it because you've told them two verifiable truths. Try not to start your own rumors. Control the gossip or innuendo coming out of your own house. Make sure that you control what is released from that gossip mill of yours. Yeah, so the next steps. So if you reduce one of your enemies to a shadow of their former selves, is that the end of the campaign? Of course not. That could be a slowly building revenge plan on the part of those you took down. I mean, you're not going to kill everybody who's part of that house. Presumably somebody will be hidden away somewhere, and they might counter plot back against you, building up over time. Perhaps you lose trust in the Landsrat from your vicious action to take down your enemy, and that leads to more complications. I mean, there's always a consequence. Everything has a consequence, and nothing is for free. Going to get back to that great concept there. Now we have the tips on running intrigue conflicts. So this can be a little bit difficult. Intrigue is not a physical conflict like you have in a skirmish or a duel or warfare. You're not moving around a map in the same way, but you do have assets, which could be like some kind of attitude or a lie or blackmail material. They're not necessarily corporeal forms. How do you run this in the game? Well, you need to basically do what they've done in the books, Frank Herbert, and take the interior thoughts of the players and sort of lay them out. So speaking a character's thought out loud, presenting the use of their assets as they might manifest, and be effective and evocative. They can describe how they use information they have or why such the information would be effective. Then that helps the GM understand why that asset is important and how it could be potent in this situation. And the GM should also allow for preparation. So if the game master presents an obstacle for you to overcome, player character might have already anticipated that, but if they haven't, then maybe they can try and explain how they might have anticipated it by using momentum or something like that. So they give an example here of Rachel DeShaw, highly trained spy. She's engaged in an intrigue conflict with one of the guards, and the guard demands to know what right she has to access the refinery. That's the obstacle. So Rachel could use a communicate test for persuasion. She could try to knock him out with a battle test, or she could spend momentum to say, you know what, I've got a false ID that lets me get in right away. You could also use the momentum to recall information about the guard. She's a spy, so she probably would have checked out her targets first, and she would have found some incriminating facts about this dude and said, well, if you don't let me in, then I'll tell your wife about your 3 mistresses you have over in Arakeen, so you better let me in. And then he'll back off. Also, being flexible about the use of momentum rules and the kind of assets that players can create, make it more freewheeling. I really like this example here because it gives you a number of different ways of resolving that situation, not all of which are intrigue conflicts, by the way. And that's an important part here. You don't necessarily need a full intrigue conflict. Make sure that the intrigue that's being played out is of appropriate scale, doesn't take up too much time and all that. And try to involve as much of the group as you can. Build these intrigue maps and make sure that the players can all play a role in actioning them, developing plans and counter plans and plans within plans. So there's some tips on roleplay and intrigue. So, you should be encouraged to get into it when you're playing out, witty and charming characters, but that can be difficult. Not everybody feels comfortable in that situation. So as long as they try to express what the goal of their interaction is, that's fine. And you can also explain to them that, look, you don't have to actually be really witty and charming. You can just say something. If you roll a success, then your character says it in a really effective way. So that's fine. You aren't your character. This is still a game with an element of escapism, right? So let me talk about the social arena. This is all about placing assets into the zone representing the character player characters want to affect, and then they use assets in that zone to defeat the rival. So at that point, the player characters can gain the bonus they sought when the stakes were set. So if you wanted to break the conditioning of the Souk Doctor of your rival house so that you have a way in to get poison into the meal of somebody or other, then, that would be the outcome of the intrigue conflict. You'd need to set up zones to indicate the different steps you need to take to break that conditioning or to otherwise beat down the Souk Doctor to get you through all that. They talk about setting that up, then setting the stakes for the conflict, which is really important. So the player should declare what they want to achieve, and the game master should declare, well, if you fail, there's a problem, And here's what it is. So if you fail to break the Suit Doctor's conditioning, he may well just immediately turn tail and tell the head of his great house, which then could lead to, a declaration of Kanli or God knows what. So it could be very difficult. For assets, these are often going to be intangible, as mentioned before. So, sometimes they might not be useful more than once as well. So if you have some kind of leverage, like blackmail against a particular person, and it doesn't work, then the GM might say, well, you can't use that in a different intrigue conflict. Again, I think for a GM, it pays to be a little flexible. If your character was smart enough to gain blackmail leverage in one context, then you should consider them capable of doing so in a future conflict as well, or they could spend momentum to generate that asset, and it would make sense. You could also have unreliable assets. So it could be that you have a friendship with somebody and you think they'll be quite loyal and trustworthy, but the GM might decide that they're unreliable. The only time this cannot be done is when you have a permanent asset belonging to the player character. So that's a personal asset that is carefully curated by you and won't betray you. But these are like external assets that you've cultivated. They could still betray you. Perhaps, a face dancer has replaced them, or they've been threatened by the Sardaukar. They may well change sides on you. So the game master in that case can use threat to neutralize the asset or even make it change sides. So you spend 2 threat plus 1 per point of quality the asset has to negate any and all effects the asset has for the rest of the conflict. And if they spend the same amount again, the asset changes sides. So it's quite expensive, and that's fertile ground for the GM to spring the twist and the traitor on you because it feels fair at that point. You banked that threat for this moment, you paid for it with the tokens, it's okay for it to happen because that's how the game works. You don't want to spring that stuff on a player out of nowhere. You want it to feel earned in a sense, and that the player should have considered this earlier, should have thought about the amount of threat points you had. I really like that aspect, that unreliable assets are a way to introduce twists and betrayals in a way that feels fair because of the meta currency. I know some people don't like meta currency. It was recently discussed in one of the comments on my channel, but I think it really works for Dune because Dune really is a lot about intangible things and about assets that are fleeting or unreliable, and the use of momentum makes the use of those narrative devices actually kind of systematized and formalized. And so these narrative devices become something that you pay a cost for, and the players observe you paying a cost for it, and they can observe how many resources you have to create such a situation, and they can make a judgment based on that. And I think that's very important. And then they give some example new assets for use in intrigue conflicts. So you might have a cast iron alibi. So it protects the character by proving you couldn't have physically done whatever you were accused of. Keywords of distraction, lies, and location. You could have a fall guy. So you point the finger at somebody else. Again, it's a defensive asset. You can also use it as an attack. So you can kind of position a rival as the fall guy, and then they'll have to deal with the consequences. So it has the keywords accusation, rival, and bystander. You then have favored things, knowledge of a person's loves and passions, basically. So you can use that to quickly build friendships, secure loyalty, and ensure trust. They might even give you some of their specialized knowledge, really appeal to somebody's passions. So the keywords are bonds, knowledge, loyalty, and connection. You could also cultivate an innocent reputation. Again, mainly a defensive asset. It makes it harder for others to accuse you of manipulating and deceiving others because it looks like you're just a kind and innocent type of person. Planned treachery is the opposite of that. Giving detailed insight into a conspiracy to betray a member of a great house or similarly high-ranking person, this information can be used to intimidate participants to access and thwart the plot or to aid in its completion. Keywords, cunning, treachery, and knowledge. Finally, you have secret past. So you might have the knowledge of the previous activities of certain individuals, which give you a means of blackmailing them, controlling them, or predicting their next action. So as an asset, you get secret knowledge of a significant failing in a character's past, and you can use that to control them, predict certain actions if deployed at the right time with the keywords subterfuge, deceit, and revelation. So reputation, this is an interesting one because reputation is dealt with using traits. So it's not something you have like a numeric level in. Characters' traits tell you what the reputation is, kind, cruel, brutal, that kind of stuff. You can have multiple levels of traits as well. So they say if you want to say that, all Harkonnens are cruel, but Beast Raban is the worst, you'd give him brutal 2 or something, but that risks overloading single dice rolls. You might just want to give him another trait instead. A collated reputation is made up of several traits. So several traits can be used when a character is exerting their reputation. If they're trying to apply brutal, then being cruel and spiteful could also help them to be more intimidating. And then there's a power differential element. So if someone is trying to threaten you at a social event, but you both have several guards, they won't seem so impressive. But if you're stuck to a chair in a dungeon and they've got, a Sardaukar next to them and a brutal reputation, then that's going to be a big problem. You can also cultivate fake traits, and I love this. So people in the Imperium have a tendency to lie. That applies to reputation as well. It takes a little bit of work to cultivate a fake reputation, but it can be very helpful. If you're patient and a good actor, you can convince the right people of the real you, in quotes, and let the rumor mill do the rest. So you have this personal venture that you can do using the system outlined in the Great Game. So you use gain reputation with the discipline skill, difficulty 3, and you make a point of acting a certain way to develop a new trait. And it can be of any trait of your choosing as long as it applies to your reputation. It's lost at the end of the next house management session. However, if the game master agrees that you haven't acted contrary to the new trait, it may be kept until the following session. After that, this trait can then be made permanent in the usual way. Same trait can be gained if desired each time this venture is used. You can also have fame being important as well, so that's also dealt with traits like well-known, celebrity, famous, noble, etc. Traits that focus on fame and glory can be used to make an entrance, get yourself noticed, and that requires a communicate test at a difficulty based on the importance of the gathering. If it's a society gathering as well, then traits like being well-dressed or stylish could also be important. Now we've got a really interesting part of the book here with this new drive. So in the core book, you have the base drives: duty, faith, justice, power, and truth, and that covers a broad range of motivations, but not everything. So here they offer 6 new drives that you could try, and that gives you just a lot more flexibility in character creation, which I love. And they have great examples for each of these 6 drives. So for challenge, this is the desire to always be tested and ideally overcome obstacles, and they use the example of Paul Atreides. So for example, he risked death by drinking the water of life to really see if he is what people think he is, and they give some example challenge statements as well. We have glory, so this is the desire to be rewarded with praise for your actions, and the example here is the Beast Rabban, so he loves his reputation as a brutal overlord. They have some example glory statements here, like people expect better to be feared than adored, respect is love, blah blah blah. We have indulgence. These are people who just don't want to do much of anything, but they just focus on their own needs, no matter how illegal or immoral they may be. And here we have Fade Rotha, very good example there as well. He's conditioned to privilege since birth, and he puts his needs above everybody else, including house and family, and he loves winning and loves cheating to win. He just loves winning. Doesn't care how he comes about it. Hate, we have the example of Vladimir Harkonnen, which is perfect. So hatred can fester. Old feuds breed loathing among those even who know nothing of the original slight. So the Baron, of course, is a perfect example of that. The Bene Gesserit poisoned him. The Atreides usurp his position of respect, but he has his revenge. So the fact that he is already a great house doesn't mean anything. He needs to take every opportunity to wipe out his hated enemies. They have some hate statements. I hate enemy. I will drag them down with me. Nothing matters but revenge. You get the idea. Then we have honor, which is kind of the opposite. So are you trying to find a moral path in a difficult world? And it's hard to do so with so much gray areas all around you, especially in the Imperial courts and the halls of the Landsraad. But here we have Gurney Halleck as an example. So he develops a code to live by to maintain his self-discipline and moral compass in the face of what the Harkonnens make him suffer. So another perfect example. The honor statements might be never kill an unarmed foe, I protect the innocent, I do not break my word, that sort of thing. And then we have love, which is beautiful. It's in short supply in a universe of arranged marriages and breeding programs, but it still has the power to change destinies. And here we again we have a perfect example of Lady Jessica. So her love for her partner, Duke Leto, caused her to act against the orders of her own order. The Bene Gesserit wanted her to not bear a son. She did so anyway, and that led to the changing of the entire Imperium. And again, we have some love statements. I love my brackets partner. I would do anything for my children. I can't be without my bracket sibling. My best friend will never let me down. All this kind of stuff. And they also give some tips on creating a new drive, but it has to be something that actually motivates somebody. It can't just be a feeling. So happiness is not a drive. It's just a feeling. So the drive would be what the character needs to do to get happiness, not happiness itself. But I think the ones they provided here are fantastic. The examples are just too perfect. They all fit really well, give you the immediate idea of how that kind of drive would work in play. Another lovely 2-page spread here. So this chapter is about controlling your house. And we have a quote from Prince Raphael Corino in his Discourses on Leadership. So this is about taking power. So if you want to seize control of your house as a vassal, you're part of, a larger organism. So they give you some tips on how to set yourself up. So you basically try to make yourself invaluable. You do a great job. You keep them up to date on the situation for your ruler. You interrogate spies. Rather than just finding out information, you break down your master's enemies. You make yourself invaluable, and then you start filling the area around you with your closest and most trusted allies. And then as you get more and more responsibilities, other vassals will start to fall behind you. You start to make yourself more important to them, more valuable to them. And eventually, you will be in a position where potentially you could, and the example here is throw a fake coup, get some other members of the house or an agent from outside to try and overthrow the house, and then you sweep in and save the day. By that time, you are in position to rebuild. The other vassals are behind you. You replace the lost servants and dead people with your own people, and now the ruler has no allies, and you can simply shove them aside. How brutal is that? Then we have the opposite of that. So if you're the ruler, what should you do? Leadership is difficult, right? You need to encourage your vassals to tell the truth, teach your vassals that you'll fix their problems and don't blame them for everything, judge others by the company they keep. So really make sure that you understand who people are associating with and use that to judge how much they can be trusted. Give the right vassals to the right problem so they feel they're at their best, they can shine, and also you get done what you need done. Don't attempt to avoid danger because everything is dangerous in the Imperium. If there's a blatant trap, then go ahead and send somebody into it and give them the tools to overcome it, or send a doomed spy to absorb that show of power and strike somewhere else. Don't be afraid of danger because it can always be turned to your advantage. Old wounds never go away is another one. So if you hurt Baron Harkonnen 1,000 years ago, that vendetta still lives on many generations later, and to your enemies be the devil, to your allies be a savior. So that's a really good one as well. So, your enemy should fear you. You should make sure that they are not prepared to take you on. And then if you want to cultivate allies, be the solution to their problems. Give them a loan or a gift if they're in trouble. Help them out when somebody attacks. Then they'll be in your debt. It's more than just being nice to them. It's actually making sure that they owe you something. But with your enemies, be merciless. Don't just stop with, hey, I found your spy, I killed him, don't do it again. Burn them down. Salt the soil, cut down anyone left over. That's the way that you stay alive in the Imperium. Interesting one here is no wall is taller than your people's love. So people are your greatest asset. So you treat them with love and it'll come back tenfold. And there'll be some cowards who might be intimidated by an enemy spy and give you up. But there'll be 5 loyalists for every coward if you treat your people well. And they'll turn in that coward. And then you won't have to worry about these infiltrations of your community. Then there's some information here and tips on ascending. So of course in the Great Game we have rules on ascending from one type of house to the next. They point out that regardless of what the mechanics say, the GM should feel satisfied that the house is really in a position to ascend. They've really done something worthy of a change in status. So just because, they can point to a set of roles they've done really well, doesn't mean that they've actually got the reputation and curried enough favor to really start calling themselves that. That's a really good hot tip for the GM. Then we got some new political talents which can be applied to anybody. There's some cool stuff here about seducing people, which helps you gain trust. There's the flick of the wrist, where you could do things like spending a momentum to pick a lock, pick a pocket, or otherwise use sleight of hand without being noticed. But you can't steal anything particularly important because people will be aware of it. You can talk your way out of trouble with a golden tongue, so you can use communicate on a single skill test instead of any other skill. So including battle, you can talk your way out of it. You can turn insults into compliments once per scene by spending momentum. You can neutralize threats with the cost of 1 momentum. You've spent time developing poison resistance, so if you imbibe a poison, you can say to the GM, I'm going to pay you 3 threat, and if you take it, then this is a poison I trained myself to be immune to. And if they agree, they can take the threat, or they can disagree and you'll have to deal with the poison. You can have a rapier wit. You can get your opponent to partially disarm themselves by saying that, it's dishonorable to do what they're doing. A slip of the tongue, basically you could force a negative social trait onto an enemy. You get a perfect deal by reducing the difficulty of any attempt to make another character accept a business deal. They must be getting something out of the deal. It doesn't have to be fair, but they have to be getting at least something. Quiet knife. So this allows you to make an attack in a physical conflict, but the difficulty for it to be heard is 1 step higher. So you might quietly dispatch someone in the middle of a crowded party and it won't be noticed. And also you have weight. Once per scene, you can spend 2 momentum just before a physical conflict, and you could do an inspiring monologue. Everybody stops and listens, and you do an average communicate test. And if you get momentum, you resume the conflict, you can use that and inspire those on your side. You can have your threats are meaningless, so once per scene, you can remove a complication you gain through social interaction. And now we have to talk about the different roles in the house. I'm not going to go through the details of these because I think this is a really valuable part of the book for players in particular, but basically the different roles, which particularly are detailed in the Great Game. Taking on these roles, you should pay attention to what your talent pool is like and what you're really trying to do in that position. And so they give you really great tips on that and then summarize useful talents, which include talents that you wouldn't necessarily give a second look to. So you go through, what kind of talents you would need in a ruler and what your goals are. Same if you're a consort, what kind of talents would be useful for that. Advisors. So a ruler needs an advisor for perspective, so they give you some useful talents to help you deliver that. Chief physician. Of course, all the Suk Doctor talents are good for this, but some of the less obvious talents they point out are things like bold, understand, cool under pressure. Those can be really useful in unexpected ways. Counselor. This is somebody who is kind of a strategist, addressing problems, managing funds. This role is highly suited to a Bene Gesserit, and all of their talents can be useful to that. Voice, hyper awareness, prana bindu conditioning, etc. But if you're not part of the order, you you could use other talents like subtle words, suit conditioning if you're a suit doctor, verify, which you could use to check information with the GM. Envoy is basically you're the hub of information. You know every secret deal, every clandestine conversation. The binding promise talent, you can put people into agreements that are more beneficial to you and them. And there are some other useful talents listed here, like to fight someone is to know them, specialist and useful asset can help you get out of danger, and passive scrutiny helps you get more information. As an heir, so you're going to inherit the house one day, you need to position yourself where people believe that you're going to be good in that role. So you have to decide whether you're going to be feared or loved or both. You're kind of viewed with suspicion. People aren't sure about you and whether you'll be good enough. So they give you some useful talents to turn that on its edge. So stirring rhetoric, the reason I fight, unquestionable loyalty. If you're the marshal, you're the ruler's troubleshooter, so you have to solve problems like smugglers and pirates and robbers and so forth. And so you need talents that help you do that. Improvised resources, finding trouble, cautious, be good ones. A scholar, you don't get a lot of respect because you just know things, but make sure that when the ruler needs something told to them, they ask you. When they need information, they come to you. Talents like intense study is really good for that. Masks of power, specialist. If you're a spy master, your goal is to weaken the enemy before you even get to the battlefield. So use your spies carefully, use your assets carefully. So things like masks of power, subtle steps, subtle words. Verify, of course, is good. Cool under pressure. Dual fealty. So if you have allies in more than one camp, that could be really useful for a spy master. Same with hidden motives and improvised resources. Swordmaster. So this is a pretty direct role. You're responsible for the house's personal guards, its janissaries, and it's your job to convince them they're held in great esteem and that the ruler trusts them. When everybody else fails and threat comes knocking on the door, you need to be the one able to stop it. Protect your ruler. So you need to take direct, which allows you to direct your bodyguards to act out of turn. You could take out a whole bunch of people in no time flat if you use that correctly. Rapid recovery is important as well, help you heal, and there's plenty of others that could be useful, like constantly watching, dedication, etc. The treasurer is a good one. So you'll be the chief connection to Chom. So you have access to lots of information, you have access to the house's funds, and access to everybody's budgets. So you're pretty important by that, but you need to make sure that you don't make yourself a target. Mentats are really good for this, obviously. Mentats are good with numbers. Their talents are really useful. Calculated prediction in particular. Some of the spacing guild talents are also useful if you want to, smuggle items onto a ship a couple of hundred hard-hitting fremen to your enemy's base. The guildsman can help you do that. Always there's an interesting secondary way to look at some of these. War masters, your responsibility is running wars in the military, strategy and tactics. So for this, you'll need to know talents like Master at Arms, the Slow Blade, Stirring Rhetoric, Decisive Action could be useful. Questioning Loyalty, of course, would be good. All this stuff is kind of useful for the GM, but also for the players who might want to play these kind of roles. Then we have Secrets of the Imperium. So the secrets of the Tleilaxu, my one and only mention of the axolotl tanks, which are really gross. So the Bene Tleilax, we know they produce all kinds of biological and genetic horrors. They do so through axolotl tanks, which most people have heard the word, but they don't know what it means. What it actually is they steal women off the street, lobotomize them, and wire them into various systems to use their wombs to develop whatever chemical, creature, or product they're currently working on. Most factories have rows upon rows of these tanks, which are actually lobotomized human beings. It's a closely guarded secret. Even in an Imperium where there's slavery, which there is, this conduct is absolutely disgusting and unforgivable. So the Bene Tleilaxu take great pains to make sure that nobody finds out about this. So the women of Tleilaxu, of course, aware that some of them disappear for no apparent reason, and that you don't want to be chosen by the masters because you'll never be seen again, but particularly women never come back. The society as a whole in Tleilax is extremely misogynistic because they see women as just tools. And this also led to the Great Spice War, so we're getting into spoiler territory here, but basically, if you use a Bene Gesserit as an axolotl tank, some interesting things can happen that are not necessarily turn out well for everybody. Then we have the abilities to produce golas. This is one of their many perverse talents. They can bring back the dead. So they can clone a dead body. Process isn't perfect because the golas don't have their original memories and they need retraining in basic skills like children, but that means they can train the gola for a specific purpose. Bodies are regrown from just using the original tissue. They're used because there's demand for them from clients and also because they can use them for their own cheap labor or for other advantages. It is possible but rare for a gola to also be a player character, created like any other character, but it's assumed they've been bought or gifted to the house they will serve upon. They could be trained as mentats or guild agents, but the Bene Gesserit won't train gola, and the Fremen usually kill them on sight, as few trust anything that comes from the Tleilaxu, even with Imperial conditioning. The gola suit is exceptionally rare, and you also gain the additional trait gola, which makes people uncomfortable with you. They don't blame you for being who you are, because you didn't choose that way, but they will just be suspicious of you because you come from the Bene Tleilax, and that's it. A Tleilaxu-based campaign offers many possibilities, but best suits a group looking for espionage and intrigue. The Tleilaxu are almost universally reviled wild, so it's very hard to run a game looking for alliances and friends. But if you want to do lots of creepy, ghoulish stuff to try and get ahead, a Tleilaxu campaign could be very interesting. But you may have to deal with really gross things like resurrecting the dead, and of course the horrible axolotl tanks. You could make the axolotl tanks something slightly less horrible, which might be good. Just to kind of reduce the nastiness overall. And they give some example campaigns for Tleilaxu, so you could be serving a master and trying to help them get hold of supplies for his experiments, which could be pretty dirty work. They could be regular folk trying to get along in Bandalong City on Bene Tleilax. Maybe they want to try and stir up a rebellion, get themselves a little bit of a better life, so that could be interesting as well. Then we get into the Secrets of the Spacing Guild. Now, we had some details on them previously, but here we have some more details. So the origin of the Spacing Guild, which we'll get into. Tupile. The star system is unknown, moons are unknown, habitable, unknown, but like class 4. So it's basically almost a mythical place. I mean, the rest of the Imperium has heard of it. This is where houses go when exiled as refugees. The Spacing Guild knows of the place. It's a group of habitable planets in a single solar system, but they don't tell anyone where it is. So for a substantial fee, they will sweep out an exiled house to Tupile, and they can live out there in relative comfort with their resources, but of course it'll cost them a hell of a lot. And the guild will keep their secrets, because you never know when that might come in useful. They may need to marshal their forces in great numbers, and anybody they will have kept alive in Tupile would be potentially very willing to do that, so you never know. The guild, of course, have their own homeworld of Junction, so that's very different from Tupile. There's some discussion here about the guild and the Imperial Court. One thing here, again, we're in spoiler territory, so I won't go into too much, but in eras prior to and during the reign of Paul Muad'Dib, there's not much interest in what's going on beyond the known universe. The guild basically has learned that there are some external threats building up, but then basically that comes into play in the much later books in the series. And so if you want to play in that era of time, then the guild campaign might take players into the far reaches of space to discover that threat, maybe through terrifying encounters. They'll try to get people to care about it. Depending on the era, they might be forced to care. Then we talk about navigators, and guild navigators are so cool. The navigators are basically heavily mutated, heavily trained ingesters of continuous amounts, huge amounts of spice. And that spice gives them prescience that they can then use to plot the dangerous pathways through folded space-time to pilot a Hayliner to anywhere within and without the known universe using the Holtzman engines on the ship. However, it is believed that the first navigator, Norma Kenva, was able to fold space by herself, skipping worlds with the power of her will alone. So it's at least possible that some other navigators may share that ability. Certainly, the guild would like to rediscover it if possible. Now, navigators have really interesting side effects because their prescience is so strong. Any characters with prescience or enhanced senses, like Bene Gesserit characters, would find the navigators extremely difficult to sense or make predictions about. And anyone connected to the navigator, either just by being near them or being allied to them, is also shielded from detection in the same way. So having a navigator ally would be incredibly useful, but also incredibly difficult to cultivate, because navigators are, for one, very alien to most people. Not many of them take much pleasure in interacting with humanity once they've been mutated for a certain degree of time. And most people have never seen them. In fact, you'd have to be in a very privileged position to meet one personally. There are a few navigators that do interact well with humans that are kind of kept in that role, while the less sociable ones are out piloting ships. Now, they make a sidebar here that full navigators are not recommended for player characters. They're not mobile, they can't act very well, they need bulky and expensive light support systems and a huge amount of spice just to exist, and their abilities are extraordinary. So they're a bit too powerful, but they could be very interesting to include in a campaign. They have some interesting qualities about them that would make them intriguing to interact with or to try and form alliances with, as I've discussed before. And then we have some new NPCs for guild people that you might want to deal with. So guild bankers, they have talents in methodical efficiency. So in making an understand test that applies to finance, one of the d20s in their pool is maybe considered to have a 1 instead of just rolling it. So automatic determination. And they of course have their highest drive in justice, 7. Wealth flows to those who deserve it, with their disciplines being 7, with focuses in composure and precision, and their understand being a 6 with a focus in finance. We have, again, example bankers and scenario hooks. No art, sadly. I would love to see some art for these. A bit of a shame. I feel like they cheaped out a little bit there. Same with the guild engineer. No art, but a great description. So they're familiar with restricted spacecraft technology like fold space engines and can attempt tests on those devices with no penalty. They have assets of full Hayliner access, toolkits, and spare parts, and their drive is truth. 7, machines don't lie. So they're most comfortable fixing an engine, not dealing with people. Their skills, they've got discipline at 6 with a focus on precision, understand at 7 with focuses in advanced tech and spaceship tech. We got guild navigators, still technically human, but not really. Their talents are all the navigator talents, which we'll see in a minute. There's a few examples of them. Their highest drive is faith at 7. My own abilities will keep us safe. Their skills, they got focuses and communicate at 4 with the secret navigator language, which is very hard to understand. Discipline at 7. They've got precision, and understand at 7 as well. Focus of fold space navigation, and mathematics. Then we got the guild spies. They've got the talent of hidden motives. When somebody fails to understand or communicate test against them, they may immediately create a trait which reflects mistaken belief. Highest drive in duty at 7. Drive statement of the guild relying on my information. In their skills, they got battle at 6 with focuses on sneak attacks, and communicate at 7 with acting and disguise focuses. In this one we have a piece of art, but nothing for the other ones. Bit of a shame, really. And one more, again, without art, we have the Weiku Steward. In the Great Game, we learned that the guild ships are crewed by the Weiku, an exiled house of refugees, because they've been forbidden to set foot on any planet. So they live aboard ship the whole time. Their talent is subtle steps, so when they try to sneak by or pass unseen through an area, the first extra d20 they purchase is free, so they don't have to spend momentum on it. So they always roll 3d6 for those kind of tasks. Their highest drive statement is truth with a 7, statement being I yearn to see new places. Their skills are discipline at 7 with focuses in observe and precision, and their understand is at 6 with etiquette. They're very good with etiquette because they will have to deal with many, many different houses in the course of their experience aboard ship. Then we have some new talents. So we'll look at the navigator talents, which are particularly cool. So Safe Path is for navigators. They make a challenging difficulty 2 discipline test. If successful, they'll reduce the threat or momentum pool to 0 for the next scene they enter. No ambush or surprise attack is possible at the start of the encounter, and no one will have a ready weapon or offensive asset in play. So wherever they come to is safe, basically. So because they can see ahead of time, they'll make sure that the moment they arrive is completely safe for everybody. They also are fold space pilot. With this talent, they're the only ones that can make a fold space jump in a Hayliner or similar vessel with fold space engines. It only requires an average understand test, with failure taking the vessel off course, but usually that just requires another successful jump to make the correction. Complications may cause the ship to get lost or be wildly off course. Distance makes no difference in the difficulty of the test, so it's just as easy to go to the other side of the galaxy as it is to go 1 star over, which is quite interesting. They can also create a null zone, which is just by their mere presence, so any attempt to use prescient or clairvoyant abilities on you or anyone in your immediate area is always 1 difficulty level harder, and you can decrease this penalty by spending threat moment or momentum for the duration of a scene. Additional point may also be spent to mask any single person not nearby, but who is working on your behalf. Navigators can also sense the path, so when you obtain information, you may ask as one of your questions if the subject has a destiny. For the cost of an additional threat or momentum, you may get a glimpse of what this destiny could entail. Now that's very cool. Then we have, for navigators, the right moment. They can spend a determination point to perform an action. May also reduce the difficulty of that action by 1 in addition to any other effects granted by the determination point. They also have sight of the universe, so they can see any part of the known universe but on a planetary scale. You can't see what individuals are doing, but you can see when a planet is being bombarded, when a sun explodes, or when a Hayliner folds space to a new destination. That's pretty rad, isn't it? So then we have roles within the guild. So roles of advisor, envoy, treasury, war master, and then advice on space and guild campaigns, which is pretty useful. There's not too much detail on this because there was a bit of that in the Great Game, so we don't need to go too much into it. Then we have famous navigators. So first we have Norma Kenva, who was mentioned before for the ability to fold space on her own without actually using an engine for that. It could be one of the guild's many secrets. It's possible that she's still alive and actually still flitting around beyond the known universe and moving behind the scenes, but she's very inhuman after 10,000 years of spice exposure. Or it could be that her remains are entombed on Junction and there's a breeding program, much like the Bene Gesserit, to try and raise another version of her. That'd be quite interesting. Their own kind of Kwisatz Haderach who can control space the way the Kwisatz Haderach transcends time. That's very cool. And then we have some examples of other famous navigators as well. Really great info. Now we got some secrets of Chom. So they're covered in both the core rulebook and the Great Game, where there's a lot more detail. But here we're looking at the highest level of Chom. So this is becoming a director. Typically, you would do that by being ahead of a great house. So the most common way of getting a directorship is to be heir to one of the major houses whose head has a directorship. Then, of course, the relevant parent has to die. So meeting the board in physical space is infrequent. Usually you conduct business via specially appointed couriers, and the couriers answer to the board as a whole rather than to individual directors. And the composition of the board is almost identical to that of the Landsraad, so board meetings often take place on the fringes of major Landsraad meetings. Balancing loyalty to house and Chom is an interesting little bit. So if you're a director, obviously, you need to be loyal to Chome, but you want to protect your house from horrible things like audits, that would be horrible in both directions. You would lose your directorship if you submit your own house to audit, unless you come through the audit without stain on the house's character or your character, which is quite unlikely. And in that case, you would be annoying Chome, while your house would be happy that everything worked out, but Chome would be unhappy because you wasted all their time. Yeah, there's really not a good way to escape that situation. So then we have some new talents for Chome. Basically, these are really powerful. I mean, we're talking about director level. So you have access to Chome facilities. So wherever you are, once per session, you may avail yourself of Chome facilities or assets, including personnel. By spending 1 momentum, you may gain any physical asset you desire for the next scene, from a knife to a hayliner. Especially rare or difficult assets may take some time, though, at the Game Master's discretion. These assets are delivered at quality 0. I mean, that's amazingly powerful. Then you have financial analysis. So you have accounts at your command. Obtain information about the status of any organization you have access to the records of. You can pull the strings, so all primary and secondary domains in your house generate an additional wealth point each during house management. You have rich beyond the dreams of avarice, so whenever you create an asset that has a quality of 1, you can spend momentum to increase the quality to 2, and this is in addition to the momentum you must spend should you wish to make it permanent. Finally, you can sanction a shareholder, so once per adventure, you may use your influence within Chome to sanction any one shareholder. The usual means of doing this is to remove territory or assets associated with production. Next time a sanctioned shareholder moves against you or your faction, any use of threat costs the Game Master twice the usual cost. Interesting. Then talk about how to run a Chome campaign. This would be pretty difficult because the characters all have immense political sway. Players will be connected potentially to different houses, but they give some tips on how to do that. And the campaign could be cooperational or confrontational, depending on what the group prefers, which could be quite interesting. So if you want to do a PvP type of thing, maybe you want to run a high-level Chome campaign with different directors vying for power in that context. They present some story hooks, like maybe somebody's trying to replace the spice, or there's serious revolt, or it could be a natural disaster, which is striking a planet vital to the character's interest. Then there's house management for the Chome director. So basically, if you're using that system, then during the income phase, the primary domain will produce 6 extra resources and 50 extra wealth. So that reflects the monopoly directors have on certain goods. A director's house will always be a great or major house. Must be. If it ceases to be, then you lose the directorship automatically. So bear that in mind. And there's some specific ventures you can do during the house management sub-game as well. You can assist shareholders with a successful communicate test. So that reduces the difficulty of the later shared venture by 1 if you want to do something with them later. You can call an audit, so that puts an immediate freeze on all economic activity and trade on the houses being audited, and they can't take any house management action until the audit is concluded, and the length of the audit can be played out using an intrigue conflict. That's pretty cool. Favor of the Emperor, so if you've supported the Emperor in an unpopular endeavor and you concede he owes you a favor, you can use that when you call it in ways that would be up to the GM to rule on, basically. You can also leverage your influence on the Inner Council of the Landsraad and place one motion of your choice before the Landsraad. There's no guarantee it will pass, but if it does pass, the Emperor will ratify it. And then we got a great map here of the relationship between the Chome and the Houses of the Landsraad. We've got the Bene Gesserit and the Spacing Guild on the outside. They're silent partners in Chome, so they're not part of the regular house structure. You got Chome itself, which has the Director and President, then the Board of Directors, and then below them a pyramid of accountants, auditors, mentats, and a small handful of associated truthsayers. Then linked to them, you've got a House Major, who is the Steward of Arrakis, because spice is obviously the most important commodity in the universe. They have minor houses reporting to them. By imperial decree, the Chome Corporation grants stewardship over Arrakis and control spice production to that house. The imperial houses, largest minority shareholder, will also hold a directorship, and then the various houses major could have Chome directorships, and they can purchase shares and be awarded directorships in turn. So yeah, I mean, if you're trying to get involved in this structure, it's pretty complicated, and it shows, you're really operating at a high level if you're holding a directorship. You're in the middle of it all. So there's a lot you can potentially do, but the stakes are also really high. Finally, at last, we reach the adventure. Blood and Riches. We've got a wonderful image here, and a quote from Count Hasimir Fenrig. Politics is a tangled web, an intricate labyrinth, an ever-shifting kaleidoscopic pattern, and it is not pretty. So here, where the previous supplement ended around this page count, we're now carrying on into an adventure. This is about two great houses, Novabruns and Thorvald, competing fiercely over the mining rights to the mineral-rich Odinani system. And the adventure is about how things may or may not escalate. You can see, just like with other adventures we've seen in Dune, there are lots of key events happening that are laid out. And there's a detailed timeline here. Then we have the different parts of the adventure itself. So the prelude, the status of the conflict, how the external pressures affect these two houses. Then opening moves, the different sides, gathering intelligence, trying to get them to the negotiating table, trying to have a peace summit, trying to last-ditch effort to avoid war, and then what could happen? Well, maybe the guns fall silent, maybe they don't. Either of that can lead into an interesting follow-up, because if there's peace, somebody will undoubtedly be unhappy with it. If there's war, then everybody is going to be unhappy. And there you go. That is Power and Pawns, rather. The Emperor's Court, a wonderful supplement for the Dune RPG. Highly recommended. Again, strongly recommend that you get the great game Houses of Landsraad before you get this, because the house management system is referred to repeatedly. I think it does add to what's presented here, but it also gives you additional content about the houses that you really need to know about, honestly, if you're going to play at this high level that is suggested by the supplement. So first, get the core rulebook, get familiar with that, play some adventures, with a minor house, or do the starter campaign in the super starter set, which is fantastic. Agents of Dune, of course, is the starter set campaign. Then get yourself hold of the great game. Play the house management subgame, see how that goes for you. And you're taking it up a level. You're taking on more important roles, trying to advance your house's position. And from there, when you've advanced your house to a strong position, you can play the game of tome directorships and dealing with guild navigators and trying to curry favor with the emperor and the stuff that great houses and major houses do. And that's what this book is for. So it really is an excellent addition to the rules, but it fits kind of like a jigsaw with the other parts, in my view. And buying it on its own would be a little bit confusing, especially if you don't have a great grounding in Dune lore. So I hope that was useful for those of you thinking about picking up Dune. It's a good time to do so. There's high interest in the property, of course, because the movie just came out. The new Fall of the Imperium campaign was just released recently, so look into that. I will be getting hold of it myself very soon and provide my own feedback on that, although not with too much detail, because it is a campaign and not a supplement, and I don't like to spoil things on the channel too much. So yeah, in the meantime, please like and subscribe. It helps keep me motivated to make these long-ass videos and the many, many days it takes to edit them down to something reasonable. And let me know in the comments what you thought. If you have the supplement, if there are questions that you have, I'll try to answer them. Yeah, let me know how you feel about the Dune RPG in general. I think it does a great job representing the universe of the books, and with this book in particular, it really gets you to the highest levels of political intrigue and backstabbery, which I think is fantastic. So highly recommended for those who like the game, and particularly if you're already well acquainted with the other supplement, the great game Houses of Landsraad. So hope to see you in the comments below and in the next video as well. So until then, take care and bye-bye.